A battle-hardened father, walking home after a long night shift, hears a cry for help in the dark. Two men attack a wealthy woman, but he doesn't hesitate. He charges in, saving her life with nothing but courage and instinct. But this is no ordinary rescue, because the woman he saves is an heiress with enemies lurking in the shadows, enemies tied to her own family's secrets. As their worlds collide, what begins as a moment of survival sparks something deeper: love, trust, and a bond strong enough to shake high society to its core. Yet danger isn't done with them. Whispers of betrayal, a cousin's poisonous lies, and the return of the same men who tried to destroy her threaten to rip everything apart. Can a single dad with nothing to offer but his heart protect the heiress, who has everything to lose? Or will their love be the one thing the world refuses to let survive? Before we get into the story, comment below where in the world you are watching from today. The autumn chill nipped at Jack Turner's weathered face as he walked through the dimly lit city park. His worn work boots crunched against fallen leaves, each step carrying the weight of another long night shift. The security guard position wasn't glamorous, but it paid the bills, mostly. Jack pulled his jacket tighter, his thoughts drifting to Lily. His daughter's art supplies weren't cheap, but he'd never complain. Her talent deserved nurturing, even if it meant eating plain pasta for dinner some nights. A small smile crossed his tired face as he remembered the new watercolor painting she'd proudly shown him yesterday. A sunset over their modest apartment building that somehow looked magical through her eyes. Almost home, he muttered to himself, checking his watch. 6:15 a.m. Just enough time to grab a quick shower before making Lily breakfast before school. The park's shortcut would save him 15 precious minutes. The morning fog hung low between the trees, creating eerie shadows in the pale light. Jack's military training had never quite left him. His eyes automatically scanned his surroundings, noting the empty benches and still playground equipment. Everything seemed normal, peaceful even, until a woman's scream pierced the quiet morning air. Jack's body tensed, his senses suddenly alert. The cry came again, closer this time, followed by sounds of struggle. Without hesitation, he broke into a run, following the sounds to a nearby walking path. Two masked men in dark hoodies had cornered a well-dressed woman against a tree. One yanked at her expensive-looking purse, while the other pushed her roughly to the ground. The woman, tall, elegant, even in her distress, tried to hold on to her bag, her face a mixture of fear and determination. "Please, don't," she gasped as one of the muggers twisted her arm. Jack's training kicked in instantly. He assessed the situation in seconds. Two attackers, no visible weapons, one civilian in danger. His footsteps were nearly silent as he approached, years of tactical experience guiding his movements. "Hey!" His voice boomed across the path, deep and commanding. "Back away from her! Now!" The mugger's head snapped toward him. The larger one sneered behind his mask. "Mind your own business, old man." Jack's stance widened, his body language projecting a calm threat. "This is my business." He moved closer, deliberate and controlled. "Last warning, let her go." The smaller mugger hesitated, but his partner lunged at Jack, throwing a wild punch. Jack sidestepped smoothly, using the attacker's momentum against him. With practiced efficiency, he grabbed the man's arm and twisted, forcing him face first into a nearby tree. The second mugger released the woman's purse and backed away. "Crazy fool!" he shouted at his partner. "Let's go!" Jack maintained pressure on the first attacker's arm. "Good choice," he said coldly. "Now run." He released his hold, and the man stumbled away, clutching his arm. Both muggers fled, disappearing into the morning fog like shadows. Heavy breathing filled the sudden quiet. Jack turned to the woman, who had pressed herself against the tree trunk. She was trembling, her elegant coat smudged with dirt, her carefully styled hair disheveled. But what struck Jack most were her eyes, deep brown and filled with a mixture of fear, gratitude, and something else he couldn't quite name. "Are you hurt, ma'am?" he asked, keeping his distance to avoid frightening her further. His voice softened from its earlier commanding tone to something gentler. The woman, Grace Whitmore, though Jack didn't know her name yet, tried to straighten herself. I don't think so." Her voice shook slightly, but carried a natural refinement. She attempted to brush dirt from her coat with shaking hands. Jack stepped forward slowly, offering his steady hand. "Here, let me help you up." Grace hesitated for just a moment before accepting his help. Her hand was soft against his calloused palm, and despite her trembling, her grip was surprisingly strong. As Jack carefully helped her to her feet, their eyes met properly for the first time. Time seemed to slow for a moment. Jack noticed the flecks of gold in her brown eyes, the gentle curves of her face, the way she carried herself with dignity even in such a vulnerable moment. Grace found herself steadied by the quiet strength in his blue eyes, the careful way he held her arm, the protective presence that seemed to radiate from him. "Thank you," Grace whispered, still holding his hand. "I don't know what would have happened if you hadn't." "No need to think about that now," Jack said kindly, releasing her hand once he was sure she was steady on her feet. He bent down to retrieve her purse, noting the designer label without comment. "Here you go, ma'am. Do you need me to call someone for you? The police, maybe?" Grace clutched her purse close, using it almost like a shield. "No, I don't think that will be necessary." She looked around, seeming to get her bearings. "I just need a moment." Jack noticed she was still shaking, though trying to hide it. His natural protectiveness, the same instinct that made him such a good father to Lily, wouldn't let him just walk away. "At least let me make sure you get somewhere safe. The park isn't the best place to be alone right now." She looked at him then, really looked at him, taking in his security guard uniform, his tired but kind face, the way he stood alert but non-threatening. In that moment, Grace felt safer than she had in a long time, though she couldn't have explained why. Their eyes met again, and something passed between them. An understanding, a connection, a spark of recognition between two souls who had known their share of loneliness. Neither could have known in that moment how this chance encounter would change both their lives forever. "Please, you must let me give you a ride home," Grace said, her hand still trembling slightly as she reached for her phone. "It's the least I can do after what you did for me." Jack shifted uncomfortably, his military-trained posture straight and rigid. "That's not necessary, ma'am. I just need to pick up my daughter from her study group, and our apartment isn't far." "Your daughter?" Grace's eyes softened. "All the more reason, please, I insist." She was already dialing her chauffeur before Jack could protest further. "James? Yes. Could you bring the car around to the east entrance of Central Park? Thank you." Jack ran a hand through his salt and pepper hair, looking uncertain. His instincts told him to politely decline. He wasn't comfortable accepting favors from strangers, especially wealthy ones. But the genuine concern in Grace's eyes made him pause. "My daughter Lily's at the library," he explained, his voice gruff but gentle. "She's studying with friends for a big test. We'll pick her up first," Grace said firmly, her designer heels clicking against the pavement as she led the way to the park entrance. "I won't take no for an answer, Mr. Turner. Not after what you did." A sleek black town car pulled up moments later. The chauffeur, an older man with silver hair and a kind face, stepped out and opened the door. Grace gestured for Jack to enter first, but he shook his head. "Ladies first," he said quietly, and Grace smiled at his old-fashioned courtesy. The leather seats were butter soft, and Jack felt out of place in his worn security guard uniform. He gave James the library address, then sat back, trying not to fidget. The car's interior smelled of leather and subtle perfume. "Grace's?" he assumed. "You mentioned Lily's studying?" Grace asked, breaking the silence. "What grade is she in?" "Senior year," Jack replied, his voice warming with pride. "She's applying to art schools, hoping for a scholarship. He paused, choosing his words carefully. "She's got real talent." They pulled up to the library just as Lily emerged with her friends. Jack rolled down his window. "Lily, over here!" Lily Turner looked up, her dark hair pulled back in a messy bun, art portfolio tucked under one arm. Her eyes widened at the sight of the luxury car. She hurried over, confusion clear on her face. "Dad?" She peered into the car, taking in the elegant woman beside her father. "What's going on?" "Hop in, sweetheart," Jack said, opening the door. "This is Ms. Whitmore. He glanced at Grace, unsure how to explain. "Your father helped me out of a very dangerous situation tonight," Grace supplied smoothly, moving over to make room. "I'm Grace Whitmore, and I'm very grateful to him." Lily slid in, clutching her portfolio to her chest.
"Oh, are you okay?"
"Thanks to your father, yes." Grace's eyes caught sight of the portfolio. "You're an artist?" Lily blushed, ducking her head.
"I try to be."
"I mean, I want to be."
She's being modest.
Jack said, his voice full of quiet pride. "Show Miss Whitmore that sunset piece you did last week, Lily." Lily hesitated, then carefully opened her portfolio. Grace leaned forward with genuine interest as Lily pulled out a watercolor painting of their apartment building at sunset. The ordinary brick structure transformed by golden light and deep shadows. "This is extraordinary," Grace breathed, studying the painting. "You have a remarkable eye for light and composition." Lily's face lit up at the praise, and Jack felt his chest tighten with emotion. His daughter deserved to hear words like that more often. The car wound through the city streets as Grace asked Lily thoughtful questions about her art, her college plans, her dreams. Jack watched the interaction, noting how naturally Grace drew his usually shy daughter out of her shell. As they approached their apartment building, Grace suddenly straightened. "I have an idea. Please, both of you must come to dinner at my home tomorrow evening." "Oh, we couldn't possibly," Jack began, but Grace held up a hand. "I absolutely insist. You saved me from those thugs, Mr. Turner. The least I can do is thank you properly with a good meal." She turned to Lily. "And I'd love to show you my art collection. I have several pieces I think might interest you." Lily's eyes sparkled with excitement, and Jack felt his resistance wavering.
"Please, Dad,"
Lily whispered.
"can we?"
Jack looked at his daughter's hopeful face, then at Grace's warm, sincere expression. He'd spent so long keeping the world at arm's length, protecting himself and Lily from disappointment. But something about Grace's genuine gratitude and kindness made him want to take a chance. "What time should we arrive?" he asked finally, and Grace's face broke into a radiant smile. 7 o'clock? She pulled out a business card and wrote her address on the back. "I'll have James pick you up. And please, don't argue, it's easier than giving directions." The car stopped in front of their building. Jack helped Lily out, then turned back to Grace. "Thank you for the ride, Miss Whitmore."
"Grace, please,"
she corrected gently. "And thank you, Mr. Turner, for everything." "Jack," he replied with a small smile. "Just Jack." They watched the black car glide away into the night. Lily clutched her portfolio, still looking slightly dazed. "Dad, did that really just happen?" Jack put an arm around his daughter's shoulders, guiding her toward their building's entrance. "Come on, kiddo. Let's get some sleep. Looks like we have dinner plans tomorrow." The morning light streamed through the small kitchen window of the Turner's apartment as Jack stood at the counter, staring at his coffee. Lily sat across from him at their worn kitchen table, practically bouncing in her chair with excitement. "Dad, we have to go." Lily's eyes sparkled with enthusiasm. "Do you know what this could mean? This is like something out of a movie." Jack took a slow sip from his mug, his weathered face creased with concern.
"Honey, people like us, we don't usually mix with people like Mrs. Whitmore.
There's a reason they call it high society."
"But she invited us,"
Lily insisted, pushing her dark hair behind her ears.
"She seems really nice, Dad.
And she specifically asked for both of us to come." Jack studied his daughter's hopeful expression. At 17, she still had that beautiful ability to see the best in everything, despite their struggles. His eyes drifted to the college brochures stuffed in her backpack. Dreams that seemed just out of reach on a security guard's salary. "I don't want you getting your hopes up about anything," he said carefully. "This is just a thank you dinner, nothing more." Lily rolled her eyes good-naturedly. "Dad, when was the last time you did something just for fun? Something different?" The question hit home. Since Sarah's death 5 years ago, Jack had focused solely on providing stability for Lily. Adventure, romance, socializing. These had all taken a back seat to making ends meet.
"I'll need to iron my blue shirt,"
he muttered, which made Lily jump up and hug him. "I'll call Jenny and see if I can borrow that navy dress she wore to homecoming," she said, already pulling out her phone. "You know, the simple one?" The rest of the day passed in a blur of preparation. Jack meticulously pressed his best shirt, the one he usually saved for church, and polished his only pair of dress shoes until they gleamed. He trimmed his mustache, actually used the hair product Lily had given him last Christmas, and stood before the mirror feeling like he was preparing for a military inspection. In her room, Lily was twirling in Jenny's borrowed dress. It was a modest A-line in deep blue that made her look older than her 17 years. She'd pulled her hair back with a silver clip, a gift from her mother, and wore the small pearl earrings that had been Sarah's. "You look beautiful, sweetheart," Jack said from her doorway, his throat tight. "Just like your mom." Lily's eyes misted slightly. Really? I wish. She trailed off, but Jack knew. She wished her mother could see her now. She'd be so proud of you, he said softly. Just like I am. The taxi ride to Grace's estate felt surreal. They'd insisted on taking a cab rather than accepting Grace's offer to send her car. Jack's pride wouldn't bend that far. As they left their familiar neighborhood behind, the houses grew larger, the streets wider, the gardens more manicured. Look at those gates, Lily whispered as they turned onto Maple Heights Drive. Each mansion was set back from the road, hidden behind elaborate iron gates and perfectly trimmed hedges. Jack's hands clenched slightly in his lap. Everything here screamed money and privilege. A world so far removed from their modest apartment that it might as well be another planet. What had he been thinking, accepting this invitation? The taxi pulled up to number 42, and Jack's military training couldn't stop his sharp intake of breath. Grace's house was a 3-story Georgian mansion with white columns and climbing roses. A fountain played in the circular driveway, and warm lights glowed from dozens of windows. Oh my gosh, Lily breathed, her eyes wide. It's like a palace. Jack paid the taxi driver and stood for a moment, taking in the grandeur before them. His combat boots had once walked through desert palaces in far-off lands, but somehow this felt more foreign. He straightened his shoulders, an old habit when facing uncertainty. Remember, he said quietly to Lily as they walked up the wide stone steps. We're here because Mrs. Whitmore wants to thank us for last night. Nothing more. Lily squeezed his arm. Dad, relax. You're acting like we're going into battle. Before Jack could respond, the massive oak door swung open. A butler, an actual butler, stood there in a black suit. Mr. Turner and Miss Turner? He asked formally. Mrs. Whitmore is expecting you. Please, come in. The entrance hall took Lily's breath away. A crystal chandelier cast rainbow lights across marble floors, and a sweeping staircase curved up to the second floor. Oil paintings in gilded frames lined the walls, and fresh flowers filled silver vases on antique tables. Jack stood ramrod straight, his face carefully neutral despite the opulence surrounding them. His years of military training helped him maintain his composure, but inside, his stomach churned. Everything here represented a world he didn't belong in, a world of old money, social connections, and unimaginable privilege. Jack! Lily! Grace's warm voice echoed from the top of the stairs. She descended gracefully, wearing a simple but elegant black dress that probably cost more than Jack's monthly salary. Yet her smile was genuine as she approached them, her eyes crinkling warmly at the corners. I'm so glad you came. Lily stepped forward eagerly, but Jack remained rooted in place, acutely aware of his carefully ironed shirt from the department store and his well-worn dress shoes. Grace's house was beautiful, yes, but it represented everything he'd taught Lily not to expect from life. Easy luxury, endless opportunity, effortless elegance. The butler closed the heavy door behind them with a soft click that seemed to seal their fate. For better or worse, they had crossed the threshold into Grace Whitmore's world. Jack could only hope they wouldn't regret it. The massive oak doors of the Whitmore estate opened, revealing Grace in an elegant yet simple blue dress. Her warm smile immediately put Lily at ease, though Jack's shoulders remained tense. I'm so glad you both could make it, Grace said, extending her hand. Please, come in. The foyer's crystal chandelier cast a soft glow over marble floors and artwork-adorned walls. Lily's eyes widened, taking in every detail, while Jack stood straight-backed, like a soldier at attention. This is amazing, Lily breathed, clutching her borrowed dress self-consciously. Grace guided them through to a dining room where a table was set for 3. I thought we'd keep it intimate tonight, she explained. Just us. The table settings were formal but not overwhelming. She'd clearly tried to strike a balance between elegance and comfort. The chef has prepared something special, Grace said as they took their seats. I hope you both like Italian. A server appeared with appetizers, fresh bruschetta that made Lily's eyes light up. Jack watched his daughter carefully handle the silverware, proud of how she carried herself. So, Jack, Grace began, her voice gentle, you mentioned you served? I'd love to hear more about that if you're comfortable sharing. Jack shifted in his chair, taking a careful sip of water. 20 years in the Army. Nothing too remarkable. Dad's being modest. Lily interjected. He earned 2 Purple Hearts and saved his entire unit once. Grace leaned forward, genuinely interested. That sounds remarkable to me. Jack's expression softened slightly. Just did what needed doing. These days my battles are more about making sure this one, he nodded toward Lily, does her homework. Grace laughed, and the sound was like music. And how is school, Lily? What subjects interest you most? Art, Lily answered without hesitation. I love painting, especially. We're studying the Renaissance right now, and it's fascinating how they used light and shadow. The main course arrived, perfectly prepared chicken piccata. Grace watched with satisfaction as her guests took their first bites. This is amazing, Lily said. Dad's specialty is microwave mac and cheese. Hey now, Jack protested, but there was a smile in his eyes. Grace shared about her own work, describing the children's hospital wing she'd helped fund. It's important to me that my family's resources do some good in the world, she explained, her voice carrying a weight Jack couldn't quite understand yet. As they talked, the formal atmosphere gradually melted away. Jack found himself relaxing, drawn in by Grace's genuine interest in their lives. She asked questions about Lily's art projects, about Jack's security work, never making them feel like curiosities on display. What about you? Jack asked during a lull. All this philanthropy, it must keep you busy. Something flickered across Grace's face, a moment of surprise at being asked about herself, perhaps. It does, but sometimes I wonder if it's enough. Writing checks is easy. The hard part is making sure the money actually helps people. Lily set down her fork, gathering courage. Would it be okay if I showed you some of my artwork? I have photos on my phone. I'd love that, Grace said warmly. She moved her chair closer as Lily pulled out her phone, scrolling through images of watercolors and oils. Jack watched the two of them bend their heads together over the phone screen, struck by how natural they looked. Grace's genuine enthusiasm for Lily's work was obvious, and his daughter was practically glowing under the attention. These are wonderful, Lily, Grace said. You have real talent. Are you thinking about art school? Lily's smile dimmed slightly. Maybe someday. Right now, we're focusing on community college options. Jack's jaw tightened, and Grace noticed. She quickly steered the conversation to lighter topics as dessert was served, a delicate tiramisu that had Lily declaring it the best thing she'd ever tasted. After dinner, Grace stood. Would you like to see the art collection? My father was quite passionate about collecting American painters. She led them down a hallway lined with landscapes and portraits. Lily moved from piece to piece in reverent awe, while Jack found himself watching Grace. Her posture had changed subtly. There was a tension in her shoulders that hadn't been there during dinner. This was his pride and joy, Grace said, stopping before a large canvas depicting a stormy seascape. Edward Hopper. Dad spent years tracking it down. Her voice carried a complex mix of emotions, pride, sadness, something else Jack couldn't quite identify. It's incredible, Lily whispered, studying the way the painted lighthouse beam cut through the darkness. He had an eye for beauty, Grace continued, her fingers trailing along the frame. Though sometimes I think he saw art as just another asset, something to acquire and display. Jack noticed how she spoke of her father in short, careful sentences, as if measuring each word. There was a story there, hidden behind her composed expression and perfect posture. These pieces should be shared, Grace said, more to herself than her guests. Beauty like this, it's meant to inspire people, to give them hope. She looked at Lily, who was still captivated by the hopper. That's what art should do, don't you think? Yes, Lily agreed fervently. That's exactly what I want my paintings to do someday. Jack watched Grace, watching his daughter, saw something soft and determined settle in her expression. He recognized it. It was the same look he got when he figured out a way to help Lily chase her dreams. The tour continued through the gallery, but Jack kept noticing how Grace's voice would catch slightly when mentioning her father, how her smile would fade at certain paintings. Each piece seemed to carry a weight beyond its artistic value, some memory or moment that Grace carried like a hidden burden. They stopped before a small, abstract piece, all bold colors and sharp lines. This was the last one he bought, Grace said quietly. Just a month before. She trailed off, then squared her shoulders. Well, shall we have coffee in the sitting room? Jack wanted to reach out, to offer some comfort for the pain he could clearly see beneath her polished surface. But the moment passed, and Grace was already leading them back toward the main part of the house, her perfect hostess smile back in place. The morning sun filtered through the high school's hallway windows as Lily stood at her locker, organizing her textbooks. Her phone buzzed, displaying an unknown number. She hesitated before answering. "Hello? Lily? This is Grace Whitmore from last night's dinner." Lily's heart skipped a beat. "Oh, hi, Mrs. Whitmore." She clutched the phone tighter, remembering how kind Grace had been during dinner. "Please, call me Grace," her warm voice carried through the line. "I hope I'm not interrupting your school day, but I wanted to talk to you about your artwork. You mentioned wanting to study art in college." "Yes." Lily's voice rose with excitement. She lowered it quickly, glancing around the busy hallway. "I mean, that's my dream, but—" "Well, I have a dear friend, Rebecca Chen. She's a professional artist who's shown her work in galleries across the country. She often mentors young artists, and I told her about your passion for painting. She'd love to meet you." Lily's hand trembled. "Really? That would be amazing. Wonderful. I'll arrange everything. I should probably ask my dad first," Lily interrupted, her excitement dimming slightly. She knew how her father felt about accepting help from others. "Of course, dear. Have him call me when he can." That evening, Jack stood in their small kitchen, stirring a pot of spaghetti as Lily perched on a counter stool, her legs swinging nervously. "Dad, it's such an amazing opportunity. Grace says, Miss Chen is really well known in the art world. She could teach me so much." Jack's jaw tightened. He'd spent the day thinking about Grace's elegant mansion, her casual mention of vacation homes and private galleries. "Lily, we can't start accepting favors from people we barely know." "But why not? Grace just wants to help. She's being nice." "Sometimes people's help comes with strings attached, even when they don't mean it to." Jack set down the wooden spoon and faced his daughter. "We've always managed on our own." "Is this because of Mom?" Lily's voice softened. "She would have wanted me to have every chance possible." Jack's expression flickered with pain. "That's not fair, Lily." "Neither is saying no just because you're too proud to accept help." The words hung between them. Jack rubbed his face, suddenly tired. "I'll think about it." The next morning, Jack called Grace's number, pacing in the security office during his break. She answered on the second ring. "Jack? I'm so glad you called. About this art mentor situation." He paused, choosing his words carefully. "I appreciate what you're trying to do, but—" "Jack," Grace interrupted gently, "I understand your hesitation. Really, I do. But this isn't charity. It's about giving a talented young woman a chance to learn from someone who could help shape her future. We've gotten by just fine without help." Grace's voice was kind but firm. "Jack, accepting help doesn't make you less of a father. If anything, it shows Lily how much you want her to succeed." Jack leaned against his desk, conflict evident in his stance. "I don't want her getting used to your world, Grace. We can't provide that kind of life." "This isn't about my world or yours," Grace said softly. "It's about Lily's world, the one she's trying to build for herself. Rebecca charges for her mentoring usually, but she owes me a favor. No strings attached, I promise." Jack remained silent, thinking of Lily's face when she talked about art school, about her dreams. He thought of her mother, who'd always believed in encouraging their daughter's talents, no matter the cost. "Can I think about it?" "Of course. But Jack, sometimes the bravest thing we can do is let others help us." That evening, Jack watched Lily at their small kitchen table, sketching in her notebook while doing homework. Her face held the same focused expression her mother used to have when working on a project. The thought squeezed his heart. "Lily?" She looked up, pencil pausing mid-stroke. "I talked to Grace today." Lily straightened, hope brightening her features. "And?" Jack took a deep breath. "If you still want to meet this art mentor, I think we can arrange that." Lily launched herself from her chair, wrapping her arms around his neck. "Thank you, Dad. Thank you. Thank you." Jack hugged her back, feeling some of his tension ease. "We'll set some boundaries, okay? And if at any point it feels wrong—" "It won't." Lily pulled back, her smile radiant. "I promise I'll work so hard. You'll see this could change everything." Looking at his daughter's joy, Jack felt something shift inside him. Maybe Grace was right. Maybe sometimes the strongest thing a parent could do was step aside and let help in. He watched as Lily rushed to call Grace, her excited voice drifting from her bedroom. The wall he'd built around their little world had kept them safe, but perhaps it had also kept out possibilities. Possibilities that could help Lily soar beyond the limitations he'd unconsciously set. Grace answered Lily's call with genuine warmth, and as Jack listened to their animated conversation about art and meeting times, he realized that sometimes love meant letting go of pride. Sometimes it meant trusting that other people's kindness came from a genuine place. He thought of Grace's gentle persistence, her understanding of his reservations, and felt a grudging respect grow. She'd seen what he needed to hear and had said it with both firmness and compassion. It wasn't just about art mentoring anymore, it was about learning to accept that sometimes help wasn't a handout but a hand up. The evening air hung heavy with late summer humidity as Jack walked home from his security guard shift. His boots scraped against the cracked sidewalk of his modest neighborhood, streetlights casting long shadows across familiar buildings. He'd taken this route hundreds of times, but tonight felt different. The hair on the back of his neck stood up, a sensation he'd learned to trust during his military days. A figure darted between the buildings ahead, moving with the furtive quickness of someone trying not to be seen. Jack's stride didn't change, but his senses heightened. The man's build and movement seemed familiar. Then it hit him, the mugger from the park, the one who'd grabbed Grace's purse. Jack's heart rate picked up, but his movements remained controlled. He'd seen enough combat to know better than to give away his awareness. The man disappeared down an alley between Martinez's corner store and the old laundromat. Jack waited 3 beats, then followed. The alley was narrow, lined with overflowing dumpsters and stacks of empty produce boxes. Jack moved silently, his back close to the brick wall. Ahead, he could hear footsteps and the rustle of movement. The man was talking in hushed tones. "Yeah, I'm telling you, it went wrong." The voice was rough, nervous. "Some guy showed up, military type. Couldn't finish it." Jack inched closer, careful to stay in the shadows. His heart pounded against his ribs, but his breathing remained steady. "Look, I know what Whitmore said, but..." The man's voice dropped even lower. Fine, we'll try again. Just make sure the money's there this time." Jack's blood ran cold. Whitmore, Grace's family name. This hadn't been a random mugging. It was planned. But why? And which Whitmore had ordered it? A cat knocked over a bottle nearby, the glass shattering against concrete. The man whirled around, spotting Jack's shadow. "Hey!" Jack burst into action, decades of training taking over. He sprinted after the mugger, who bolted down the alley like a startled rabbit. They weaved through the maze of back streets, past surprised neighbors taking out trash and teenagers hanging out on stoops. The chase led them past St. Michael's Church, where Jack had buried his wife 5 years ago. The thought of her gave him an extra burst of speed. The mugger was younger, but Jack's military conditioning showed. He was gaining ground. They rounded another corner, and the man stumbled on a broken piece of sidewalk. Jack nearly had him, fingers grazing the back of his jacket, but the mugger recovered, vaulting over a chain-link fence with desperate energy. By the time Jack made it over, the man had disappeared into the gathering darkness. Jack bent over, hands on his knees, catching his breath. His mind raced faster than his heart. Grace was in danger, real danger. Not from random criminals, but from something connected to her own family. The memory of her sadness when speaking about her father at dinner suddenly took on new meaning. He straightened up, looking at his watch. 9:47 p.m. Too late for a social call, but this couldn't wait until morning. He pulled out his phone, scrolling to Grace's number. She'd insisted he take it, just in case. His thumb hovered over the call button. Warning her meant getting involved. Really involved. Not just the fairy tale dinner at a mansion, or watching Lily's eyes light up at expensive paintings. This was the ugly side of Grace's world, the part she tried to hide behind elegant manners and charitable gestures. Jack thought of his daughter, safe at home, doing homework. He'd built a stable life for her after losing her mother. Did he really want to risk that by diving into whatever darkness surrounded Grace? But then he remembered Grace's genuine smile when Lily talked about art, the way she listened to him without judgment, how vulnerable she'd looked after the mugging. Yet, how quickly she'd trusted him. He couldn't leave her unprotected, not when he might be the only one who knew she was in danger. His thumb pressed down on the call button. The phone rang once, twice. Jack paced the sidewalk, his boots scuffing against concrete. "Jack? Grace's voice was surprised but pleased. Is everything all right? He took a deep breath. No, it's not. We need to talk. In person, tonight. There was a pause. When Grace spoke again, her voice was different, serious, with an edge of fear she was trying to hide. Of course. Should I send the car? No, Jack said firmly, already walking toward his apartment. I'll drive. We shouldn't trust anyone right now. I'll explain everything when I see you. Jack, you're scaring me. I know. I'm sorry. He softened his tone. But I promise I'll tell you everything. Just wait for me. And Grace? Don't tell anyone I'm coming. The line went quiet again. All right, she finally said. I trust you. Those 3 words carried the weight of responsibility. Jack ended the call and picked up his pace. He needed to check on Lily, then head to Grace's estate. Whatever was going on, whatever darkness lurked in the Whitmore family's past, he was about to step right into the middle of it. Not because he wanted to, not because he was looking for adventure or excitement, but because sometimes doing the right thing meant walking straight into trouble, eyes wide open, knowing the cost. He just hoped he was ready for whatever that cost might be. The iron gates of Grace's estate swung open with a quiet hum. Jack's worn pickup truck looked out of place as he drove up the curved driveway lined with perfectly trimmed hedges. His hands gripped the steering wheel tightly, his jaw set with determination. This wasn't a social call. The grand mansion loomed before him, its windows gleaming in the late afternoon sun. Martha, Grace's housekeeper, opened the heavy wooden door before he could knock. Mr. Turner, she said with a quick nod. Miss Whitmore is in the conservatory. Jack followed Martha through the marble-floored hallway, his boots echoing against the polished stone. The conservatory was a sun-filled room with floor-to-ceiling windows and countless plants, creating a peaceful garden atmosphere. Grace sat at a small table, papers spread before her, reading glasses perched on her nose. She looked up and smiled warmly. Jack, what a lovely surprise. Her smile faded when she saw his expression. We need to talk, Jack said quietly. About the attack. Martha quietly excused herself, closing the glass doors behind her. Grace removed her glasses, setting them carefully on the table. What about it? It wasn't random. Jack remained standing, his military bearing evident in his rigid posture. I saw one of them last night, near my neighborhood. He mentioned your name, your family name. The color drained from Grace's face. She gripped the edge of the table, her knuckles turning white. Oh, God, she whispered. I was afraid of this. What's going on, Grace? Jack's voice was gentle but firm. Someone targeted you specifically, and I need to know why. My daughter's been spending time here. I need to know if she's safe. Grace stood up shakily and walked to one of the windows, wrapping her arms around herself. My father, she began, then stopped, taking a deep breath. My father built this empire, but not all of it was clean. Jack waited silently, watching her reflection in the glass. When he died 3 years ago, I inherited everything. The legitimate businesses, yes, but also. She turned to face him, her eyes glistening. I found documents, proof of bribes, illegal deals, connections to people who... She shook her head. I couldn't just ignore it. What did you do? Jack asked, though he suspected he knew the answer. I've been cleaning house, Grace said, lifting her chin slightly. Cutting ties with corrupt partners, reporting illegal activities to the authorities, redirecting funds to legitimate charitable causes. She gave a bitter laugh. Not everyone appreciates my efforts to restore honor to the Whitmore name. Jack moved closer, his tactical mind already assessing threats. How many enemies are we talking about? Enough. Grace sank back into her chair. Former business partners who lost millions when I canceled their contracts. People who were using our shipping companies for other purposes. Even some family members who benefited from the old way of doing things. Like your cousin? Jack remembered the man's cold eyes at the dinner party. Grace nodded. Marcus stands to inherit if anything happens to me. He's not happy about the changes I'm making. Jack ran a hand over his face, thinking of Lily's bright smile as she talked about art lessons with Grace's mentor friend. His daughter was finally feeling hopeful about her future. But at what cost? These people, he said carefully. How dangerous are they? Until now, it's been threats through lawyers, suspicious accidents at construction sites, attempts to freeze our assets. Grace's hands trembled slightly as she stacked her papers. The attack in the park. That's new. They're escalating. Jack paced the length of the conservatory, his military training kicking in. Every window suddenly looked like a vulnerability, every shadow a potential threat. He thought about walking away, taking Lily and returning to their simple, safe life. But then he looked at Grace, really looked at her. Behind her elegant exterior, he saw someone fighting a lonely battle to right old wrongs. Someone trying to build something good from a tainted legacy. Someone who, despite her wealth and position, was just as vulnerable as anyone else. "You need protection," he said finally. "Professional security, not just the regular staff. I have cameras, alarms. That's not enough." Jack's voice was firm. "You need someone who knows what to look for, who can anticipate threats." "Someone like you?" Grace asked softly. Jack hesitated. Every instinct told him to keep Lily far from this situation. But he remembered Grace's kindness to his daughter, her genuine desire to help without any agenda. He thought about what he taught Lily about standing up for what's right, about helping others even when it's hard. "I have experience," he said slowly, "both military and private security. But Grace, you have to understand, if I help you, I need to know everything. No more secrets. And we do this my way." Grace stood and walked over to him, her eyes meeting his directly. "I trust you, Jack. You're the first person in a very long time that I truly trust." The weight of those words settled between them. Jack knew he was standing at a crossroads. Behind him lay the safe, predictable life he'd built for himself and Lily. Ahead was uncertainty, danger, but also purpose, and something else he wasn't quite ready to name. "I need to think," he said finally. "Need to talk to Lily. This affects her too." Grace nodded, understanding in her eyes. "Of course. Take all the time you need." Jack turned to leave, then paused at the conservatory door. "Lock up tonight. All windows. All doors. I'll call you tomorrow." As he drove home, the setting sun painted the sky in shades of orange and purple. His mind raced with possibilities, threats, and plans. He knew the smart thing would be to walk away, but deep down, he'd already made his decision. Some things were worth the risk. Jack tossed and turned in his bed, the springs creaking beneath him. Moonlight filtered through the thin curtains of his modest two-bedroom apartment, casting shadows on the wall. His mind raced with images of Grace's pale face when he'd told her about the mugger's connection to her family. The word Whitmore echoed in his thoughts, along with all its dangerous implications. He rolled onto his side, punching his pillow into a more comfortable shape. The veteran in him wanted to help to protect someone in danger. But the father in him knew better. He had Lily to think about, his beautiful, talented daughter who deserved a safe, normal life. The sound of soft footsteps in the hallway made him sit up. A thin strip of light appeared under his door. "Dad?" Lily's voice was barely above a whisper. "Are you awake? Come in, sweetheart." Lily pushed the door open, her long hair messy from sleep. She wore her favorite oversized t-shirt with paint splatters on it, her unofficial pajamas. "I heard you moving around. Sorry if I woke you," Jack said, patting the edge of the bed. She sat down, pulling her knees to her chest. "You're worried about Ms. Whitmore, aren't you?" Jack ran a hand through his gray-streaked hair. "It's complicated, Lily, because of what you heard that man say. About her last name, he shouldn't have been surprised she'd figured it out. Lily had always been perceptive, just like her mother. Yes, there might be people who want to hurt her, bad people. Then she needs help," Lily said simply, as if it were the most obvious thing in the world. "She needs you. It's not that simple. I have to think about keeping you safe." Lily's face softened in the dim light. "Dad, you've spent my whole life protecting me. Ever since Mom died, you've given up everything to make sure I'm okay." She reached for his hand. "But you can't use me as an excuse to not help someone else." Jack's throat tightened. "When did you get so wise? I learned from you." She squeezed his hand. "Ms. Whitmore is kind. She's lonely. And now she's scared. We can't just abandon her." The words hit home. Jack thought about Grace's elegant exterior and the sadness that seemed to live behind her eyes. He thought about how she'd looked at Lily with such genuine warmth, how she'd spoken about wanting to help without expecting anything in return. "We'll need to be careful," he said finally. Lily's face broke into a smile. "I'll call her first thing in the morning." By noon the next day, they were pulling up to Grace's estate again. This time, Jack noticed security cameras he hadn't seen before, and a new guard at the gate who checked their ID carefully before letting them through. Grace met them in her study, a room with floor-to-ceiling bookshelves and leather chairs that probably cost more than Jack's truck. She wore a simple blue dress, her blonde hair pulled back, making her look both elegant and vulnerable. "Thank you both for coming," she said, gesturing for them to sit. Her hands trembled slightly as she poured them tea from a silver service. "Tell us everything," Jack said gently. "From the beginning." Grace set down the teapot and sank into her chair. "My father built his empire through questionable means. I didn't know the extent of it until after he died last year. Since then, I've been trying to clean things up, make the business legitimate." She took a shaky breath. "But there are people who preferred the old way of doing things. People who see my changes as a threat to their interests." Jack leaned forward, his elbows on his knees. "The muggers? Probably hired to scare me." Grace's voice was barely above a whisper. "There have been other incidents, anonymous threats, break-in attempts." "Why haven't you gone to the police?" Lily asked. Grace gave a sad smile. "The people involved, they have connections, influence. Going to the authorities might make things worse." Jack felt his protective instincts surge. "You need better security, professional protection." "I have guards, cameras," Grace gestured vaguely. "But these people, they know all my routines, my vulnerabilities. They used to work for my father." Jack stood up and paced the room, his military training kicking in as he assessed angles, entry points, defensive positions. "I can help," he said finally, turning to face Grace. "But I need your word on something." Grace met his eyes. "Anything. Lily stays completely out of this. She goes nowhere near your business affairs, your properties, or anything connected to these threats." His voice was firm. "She continues her normal routine: school, art lessons, home. Nothing changes for her." "Dad," Lily started to protest. "No arguments," Jack said, his tone leaving no room for discussion. "This isn't negotiable." Grace stood and walked to Lily, placing a gentle hand on her shoulder. "Your father's right, dear. The best way you can help is by staying safe and continuing to pursue your dreams." She looked at Jack. "You have my word. Lily's safety comes first, always." Jack nodded, feeling some of the tension leave his shoulders. "Then we'll figure this out, together." Tears welled in Grace's eyes. "I don't know how to thank you." "Don't thank me yet," Jack said. "First, we need to understand exactly what we're dealing with. Every detail matters." They spent the next hour going over Grace's concerns, mapping out potential threats, and beginning to form a plan. Lily sat quietly, sketching in her notebook, occasionally adding an insightful comment that reminded Jack just how grown up his little girl had become. As the afternoon light began to fade, Grace walked them to the door. She caught Jack's arm gently as Lily went ahead to the truck. "Jack," she said softly, her eyes meeting his. The gratitude in them was mixed with something deeper, something that made his heart beat a little faster. "I know what you're risking by helping me, what you're sacrificing." "I'm not sacrificing anything," he replied. "I'm choosing to help someone who needs it. That's all." Grace's fingers lingered on his arm for a moment before dropping away. "Still, thank you." Jack nodded, unable to find the right words to respond to the warmth in her voice. As he walked to his truck, he could feel her watching from the doorway. The weight of her family's shadow seemed to loom over the estate, but now she wouldn't have to face it alone. The morning sun cast a golden glow across the weathered steps of St. Michael's Church. Jack Turner adjusted his tie for the third time, standing beside his pickup truck in the parking lot. The space around him filled quickly with luxury vehicles, sleek Mercedes and pristine BMWs that made his well-maintained but aging Ford look like it belonged in another world. Lily bounced on her toes beside him, wearing a floral dress she'd borrowed from her best friend. "Dad, you look fine," she said, reaching up to straighten his collar. "Stop fidgeting." Jack caught his reflection in the truck's window. His navy suit, the only one he owned, fit well enough, though it had seen better days. He'd polished his dress shoes until they gleamed, a habit left over from his military days. Grace's invitation to the church fundraiser had caught him off guard. "It's for the children's hospital," she'd explained, her eyes bright with enthusiasm. "And I'd love for you both to be there." Something in her voice had made it impossible to refuse. As they climbed the steps, Grace appeared at the entrance. She wore a simple, cream-colored dress that somehow made her look both elegant and approachable. Her face lit up when she saw them. "Jack, Lily." She hurried down to meet them. "I'm so glad you came." Her hand touched Jack's arm briefly, sending an unexpected warmth through him. Inside, the church hall had been transformed. Round tables draped in white linens filled the space, each centered with fresh flower arrangements. Well-dressed guests mingled, their jewelry catching the light from crystal chandeliers. "This way," Grace guided them to a table near the front. "I saved you seats with me." Jack noticed the curious glances from other guests, the subtle double takes as they took in his presence. He squared his shoulders, remembering countless military ceremonies where he'd stood proud under scrutiny. "Mr. Turner," a man in an expensive suit approached their table. "I'm Thomas Bradford, head of the hospital board. Grace has told us about you." His handshake was firm, but his smile didn't quite reach his eyes. "Nice to meet you, sir," Jack replied evenly. More introductions followed. Each time, Jack felt the underlying current of evaluation, the silent questioning of his presence in their midst. He answered their questions about his security work without shame. Spoke of Lily's artistic talents with pride. Grace watched these interactions from nearby, her expression thoughtful. When the event organizer called for everyone's attention, she suddenly stood up. "Before we begin," Grace's voice carried across the hall, "I'd like to say something." She turned to face Jack, her eyes warm. "Many of you have asked about my guest today. Jack Turner isn't just another donor, he's the reason I can stand here at all." The room fell silent. 2 weeks ago, when 2 men attacked me in City Park, Jack didn't hesitate to help a stranger in need. He showed the kind of courage and compassion that we're all gathered here today to support. She raised her glass. "To my hero, Jack Turner." The gathered crowd echoed the toast, but Jack barely heard them. He was caught in Grace's gaze, seeing nothing but genuine appreciation there. For the first time since arriving, his shoulders relaxed. The rest of the event passed more comfortably. Other guests approached with real interest now, asking about his military service and his work. Lily charmed everyone she met, especially when she spoke about her art. As the afternoon wound down, Grace insisted on driving them home herself, dismissing her usual chauffeur. In her car, with Lily dozing in the back seat, the tension of the day finally broke. "I saw you straightening that tie at least 10 times, Grace teased, navigating through the quiet Sunday streets. Jack chuckled. "That obvious, huh?" Only to someone who was watching. Her smile was gentle. "You know, you handled yourself better than half those board members do at their first fundraiser." "Well, I had good backup." He glanced at her profile, outlined by the setting sun. Grace laughed a real laugh, not the polite society chuckle he'd heard earlier.
Did you see Bradford's face when I mentioned the park incident? He's been trying to get me to join the board for months.
"Trying to recruit the wealthy heiress?" Jack grinned. "Exactly. But today was the first time I actually considered it." She paused at a red light, turning to face him. Sometimes it takes seeing yourself through someone else's eyes to recognize what you're capable of. The light turned green, but for a moment, neither of them moved. Something unspoken passed between them, an understanding, a connection that went deeper than words. A car horn behind them broke the spell. Grace turned back to the road, but her smile remained. They drove on, trading observations about the event's more colorful moments, their laughter filling the car with a warmth that had nothing to do with wealth or status. Jack drummed his fingers on his kitchen counter, staring at his phone. The church picnic was tomorrow, and for some reason, inviting Grace felt more daunting than facing down those muggers in the park. He picked up his phone, put it down, then picked it up again. "Dad, just call her already," Lily said, rolling her eyes as she grabbed a juice box from the fridge.
You've been staring at that phone for, 20 minutes.
Jack cleared his throat. "It's not that simple, sweetheart, Miss Whitmore. Grace. She's used to fancier things than our neighborhood potluck." "So what? She's nice. She won't care." Lily punched the straw through her juice box with unnecessary force to make her point. Taking a deep breath, Jack dialed Grace's number. She answered on the second ring, her voice warm. "Jack? What a lovely surprise." "Grace, I was wondering." He rubbed the back of his neck. "Our church is having its annual picnic tomorrow afternoon. Nothing fancy, just people bringing dishes, kids playing games. I thought maybe..." "Well, Would you like to join us? There was a pause on the other end. A church picnic? Grace's voice held a hint of uncertainty.
I haven't been to anything like that since I was a little girl.
There's no pressure, Jack added quickly. I know it's not exactly your usual. No, wait, Grace interrupted. I'd love to come. What should I bring? Jack smiled, relief washing over him. Just yourself. We've got plenty of food. Nonsense. I'll bring something. Though I should warn you, I'm not much of a cook. Store-bought is fine, Jack chuckled. We're not picky here. The next day, Jack waited in front of the small Methodist church, scanning the street for Grace's car. When her sleek black Mercedes pulled up, he couldn't help but notice how out of place it looked among the modest sedans and pickup trucks. Grace stepped out wearing a simple sundress, carrying what appeared to be a store-bought apple pie. She looked almost nervous, an expression Jack had never seen on her face before. I hope this is appropriate, she said, gesturing to her dress. And the pie, well, the bakery assured me it was their best. Jack smiled warmly. You look perfect. Come on, let me introduce you to everyone. The church's back lawn was filled with folding tables draped in checkered cloths, loaded with casseroles, fried chicken, and various salads. Children ran through sprinklers while parents chatted in lawn chairs. The scene was wholly ordinary, yet Grace looked at it all with wonder. Mrs. Martinez, Jack called out to a gray-haired woman manning the dessert table. This is my friend Grace. Oh, the pie lady, Mrs. Martinez beamed, taking Grace's offering. Jack mentioned you might come. Here, try my banana pudding. It's my grandmother's recipe. Before Grace could respond, she had a paper bowl of pudding in her hands. Her eyes widened at the first bite. This is incredible. See? Jack grinned. Told you we had plenty of good food. Throughout the afternoon, Jack watched as Grace slowly relaxed into the casual atmosphere. She helped Mrs. Peterson set up the three-legged race for the kids, laughing when the retired postman's twins got tangled up and fell into the grass. She sat with Jack's neighbor, Sarah, listening intently to stories about her garden club's ongoing feud with the squirrels. Your world is so real, Grace said quietly to Jack as they watched Lily play volleyball with her church friends.
Everyone here truly knows each other.
We look out for one another, Jack nodded. When my wife passed, these people brought food for weeks, helped with Lily. You don't forget kindness like that. Grace's eyes grew distant. In my circle, people send formal condolence cards through their assistants. I can't remember the last time someone brought me a home-cooked meal just because they cared. A commotion drew their attention as someone started up the old boombox playing country music. Couples began to dance on the grass, more enthusiastic than skilled. Want to give it a try? Jack offered his hand. Grace hesitated. I don't know this kind of dancing. Neither do most of us, Jack laughed. We just sort of sway and try not to step on each other's feet. To his surprise, Grace took his hand. Her movements were stiff at first, but soon she was laughing as Jack twirled her carefully on the uneven ground. As the afternoon wound down, they sat in lawn chairs, watching the sunset paint the sky in brilliant oranges and pinks. Grace had kicked off her sandals, her feet grass-stained from walking barefoot after the dance. You know what's strange? She said, her voice thoughtful. I've been to parties that cost more than most people's houses. Events where the champagne alone could pay for a car. But I can't remember the last time I felt as happy as I do right now. Jack turned to look at her, struck by the contentment on her face. I envy this, Grace continued, gesturing to the scene around them. The families packing up leftovers, kids helping to fold chairs, teenagers planning next week's youth group meeting. I envy your world more than you could ever envy mine, Jack. All my wealth, and I never had anything this genuine. Jack absorbed her words, watching as Mrs. Martinez pressed a container of banana pudding into Grace's hands, insisting she take it home. He saw how natural Grace looked here, how her smile reached her eyes in a way it hadn't at the fancy fundraiser. The woman who had seemed so untouchable in her mansion now sat beside him with grass stains on her feet, looking more at peace than he'd ever seen her. The morning sun streamed through the tall windows of the Maxwell Art Gallery, casting long shadows across the polished wooden floors. Lily Turner stood in the entrance, her hands clasped tightly together, her eyes wide with wonder at the paintings that adorned the pristine white walls. The gallery wasn't large or fancy like the museums downtown. but to Lily, it might as well have been the Louvre. "Are you nervous?" Grace asked softly, placing a gentle hand on Lily's shoulder. She wore a simple blue dress today, having learned from their previous outings that her usual designer attire made Jack and Lily uncomfortable. Lily nodded, her voice barely above a whisper. "A little. What if Miss Chen doesn't like my work?" Jack stood a few steps behind them, his hands in his pockets, trying to look casual despite feeling as out of place as a bull in a china shop. He watched his daughter smooth down her borrowed dress for the 10th time, his heart aching with both pride and worry. "Sarah Chen is one of the kindest people I know," Grace assured Lily. "And she's been teaching young artists for over 20 years. She'll love meeting you." As if on cue, a petite woman with silver-streaked black hair emerged from the back of the gallery. Sarah Chen carried herself with quiet confidence, her face lighting up when she saw Grace. "Grace, it's wonderful to see you." Sarah's warm smile included both Lily and Jack. "And you must be Lily Turner. Grace has told me so much about your passion for art." Lily's cheeks flushed pink. "Thank you for meeting with me, Ms. Chen. Please, call me Sarah." She gestured to a leather portfolio clutched in Lily's arms. "Is that your work? I'd love to see it." They moved to a small sitting area near a window, where morning light provided perfect viewing conditions. Jack hung back, leaning against a wall, but his eyes never left his daughter. He watched as Lily carefully opened her portfolio, her hands trembling slightly as she showed Sarah her sketches and paintings. Sarah's eyes widened as she examined each piece. "Your use of color is remarkable, Lily. And this perspective." She held up a watercolor of their apartment building at sunset. "You've captured such emotion in the way the light falls." Tears welled up in Lily's eyes, and she quickly wiped them away. "Really? I mean, I know they're not as good as—" "Don't compare yourself to others," Sarah interrupted gently. "These pieces show real talent, and more importantly, real heart." Grace caught Jack's eye across the room, sharing a smile at Lily's joy. She'd never seen the teenager look so validated, so full of possibility. Sarah continued reviewing the portfolio, offering specific feedback and encouragement for each piece. Then she pulled out a brochure from her desk. "We have a summer program for young artists. 3 days a week, professional instruction, all materials provided." She glanced at Grace, who nodded imperceptibly. "We'd love to have you join us, Lily." Lily's face fell slightly as she looked at her father. "Dad, The scholarship is already arranged," Grace cut in smoothly. "If you want it, it's yours." Jack straightened up, his jaw tightening slightly. But before he could protest, he saw the look on his daughter's face, pure, unfiltered hope. The kind of hope he hadn't been able to give her, no matter how many extra shifts he worked. "This is a competitive program," Sarah added, seeming to sense Jack's hesitation. "We only accept students who show real promise. Your daughter has that in spades." Lily turned to her father, her eyes pleading. "Dad, can I?" Jack swallowed hard, then nodded. "Of course you can, sweetheart." The squeal of delight that escaped Lily made everyone laugh. She hugged Sarah, then Grace, then ran to throw her arms around her father's neck. "Thank you, thank you, thank you." As Sarah and Lily discussed the program details, Jack noticed Grace slip quietly toward the gallery's small courtyard. He followed her, needing to say something, though he wasn't quite sure what. The courtyard was a peaceful space, with a small fountain burbling in the center and potted plants adding splashes of color. Grace stood near the fountain, running her fingers through the water. "Grace," Jack said softly. She turned, looking almost nervous. "I hope I didn't overstep. I saw her talent, and Sarah is such an amazing teacher." "You didn't overstep." Jack's voice was rough with emotion. "What you've done for Lily, I've never seen her so happy. She deserves it. She's so talented, Jack. And she works so hard, like her mother." Jack said quietly. He cleared his throat. "I've been so focused on keeping a roof over her head, making sure she's safe. Sometimes I forget she needs more than just the basics." Grace stepped closer. "You've given her everything important. Love, stability, values. This is just a little extra support. From someone who cares about both of you." Jack reached out to take her hand, to properly thank her, just as Grace moved to touch his arm. Their hands brushed, and both froze at the contact. A current of electricity seemed to pass between them, and Jack found himself staring into Grace's eyes, seeing something there that made his heart race. The moment stretched out, heavy with unspoken words and feelings neither was ready to voice. Then Lily's excited voice floated in from the gallery, breaking the spell. Their hands dropped away, but the warmth of that brief touch lingered. Through the courtyard door, they could see Lily beaming as she and Sarah discussed the upcoming classes. She looked up, catching sight of them, and waved enthusiastically. Her smile was radiant, full of dreams and possibilities that had seemed out of reach just hours before. The late afternoon sun painted Grace's estate grounds in warm, golden hues. Manicured hedges cast long shadows across the winding gravel paths, and a gentle breeze rustled through the ancient oak trees that dotted the sprawling lawn. Grace walked beside Jack, her heels exchanged for comfortable flats, her usual perfect posture slightly relaxed. "It's beautiful here," Jack said, his hands in his pockets as they followed the path around a gleaming fountain. "Must be nice having all this space to yourself." Grace's smile didn't quite reach her eyes. "That's exactly it, Jack. It's all to myself." She paused, running her fingers along the cool stone of the fountain's edge. "Do you know how many people have sat with me here just to talk, without wanting something from me?" Jack stayed quiet, sensing she needed to continue. "None," she said softly. "Until you." Grace wrapped her arms around herself, though the evening wasn't cold. "Everyone sees the estate, the art, the family name, but no one sees me. Just Grace." They continued walking, their footsteps crunching softly on the gravel. A pair of cardinals flitted between the trees, their red feathers bright against the darkening sky. "When my father passed," Grace continued, "I inherited everything. The business, the estate, the responsibility. But I also inherited his mistakes, his enemies." She shook her head. "Sometimes I wonder if I'd be happier in a small apartment somewhere, just being normal." Jack stopped at a wooden bench nestled beneath an old maple tree. "Mind if we sit?" Grace nodded, settling beside him. Their shoulders nearly touched, and Jack could smell her subtle perfume mixing with the sweet evening air. "After Sarah died," Jack began, his voice rough with emotion, "I thought I had to be everything for Lily. Mother and father, provider, and nurturer." He clasped his hands together, looking out over the grounds. "Some days, I'd look at her doing homework at the kitchen table, and she'd make this face exactly like her mother used to make when concentrating. Those moments." He swallowed hard. "Those moments would knock the wind right out of me." Grace reached over and placed her hand on his arm. The touch was gentle, understanding. "The hardest part wasn't the practical stuff," Jack continued. "It wasn't working extra shifts or learning to braid her hair for school pictures. It was seeing her hurt and not knowing how to fix it. Watching her miss her mom and feeling completely powerless." "But you did fix it, Jack," Grace said softly. "Look at her now. She's wonderful, talented, kind, hopeful. That's because of you." Jack turned to face her, struck by the sincerity in her eyes. "Sometimes I still feel like I'm not enough. Like she deserves more than what I can give her." "Oh, Jack." Grace's voice was barely above a whisper. "You give her everything that matters. Love, support, stability. I had all the material things growing up, but I would have traded it all for a father like you." They sat in comfortable silence as the sun continued its descent, painting the sky in brilliant shades of pink and orange. A cool evening breeze swept across the grounds, making Grace shiver slightly. Without thinking, Jack shrugged off his jacket and draped it over her shoulders. "Thank you," she murmured, pulling the worn leather closer around her. It smelled like him, a mix of coffee and something uniquely Jack. "You know," he said, "I've spent so long focused on being strong for Lily, I almost forgot what it feels like to just talk, to let someone see the hard parts." Grace turned toward him, her eyes soft in the fading light. "I know exactly what you mean. All these years, I've kept up appearances, played the role everyone expected, but with you," she paused, searching for the right words. "With you, I don't have to pretend." The setting sun cast long shadows across their faces as their eyes met. In that moment, the distance between their worlds seemed to vanish. They weren't an heiress and a security guard, weren't a wealthy woman and a struggling single father. They were just two people who understood each other's loneliness, who recognized in each other something rare and genuine. Jack noticed how the golden light caught the silver strands in Grace's dark hair. how her eyes held both strength and vulnerability. Grace saw the kindness in Jack's weathered face, the gentle spirit behind his protective exterior. Neither moved to break the moment. The evening breeze whispered through the leaves above them, and somewhere in the distance, a mourning dove called softly. In the growing dusk, they sat together, their shoulders touching, both acutely aware of how natural it felt to be side by side. The invitation sat on Jack's kitchen table, its cream-colored paper and gold lettering catching the morning light. He picked it up for the 10th time that week, reading the elegant script announcing the annual Whitmore Foundation Charity Gala. His calloused fingers felt rough against the expensive paper. "Dad, you're overthinking it again," Lily said, grabbing her backpack for school. She paused by the table, her dark hair falling over her shoulder as she leaned to look at the invitation. "Grace wants us there. That's all that matters." Jack ran a hand through his graying hair.
It's not that simple, sweetheart. This is different from church picnics and art galleries.
"That's why we went shopping, remember?" Lily gestured to the garment bags hanging by the door. A new tuxedo for him and a midnight blue dress for her. Grace had insisted on helping them find the perfect outfits, though Jack had firmly paid for his own. The evening of the gala arrived too quickly. Jack adjusted his bow tie in the mirror, his military training showing in his straight posture. The tuxedo fit perfectly, but he felt like he was wearing a costume. Lily appeared in the doorway, looking grown-up in her elegant dress. "You look beautiful, kiddo," Jack said, his voice thick with emotion. "And you look handsome, Dad." She straightened his tie with careful fingers. "Grace won't be able to take her eyes off you." They arrived at the Grand Hotel in downtown, where valets in red jackets whisked away expensive cars. Jack handed the keys to his old pickup truck to a young valet who looked slightly confused but remained professional. The marble-floored lobby buzzed with conversations and classical music. Grace stood at the entrance to the ballroom, greeting guests. Her silver evening gown caught the light, making her seem to glow. When she spotted Jack and Lily, her whole face lit up with genuine warmth. "You came," she said softly, reaching for Jack's hand. "Wouldn't miss it," Jack replied, trying to hide how her touch made his heart race. The ballroom dazzled with crystal chandeliers and floating candles. Round tables dressed in white linens surrounded a wooden dance floor. Wealthy donors in designer clothes mingled, drinking champagne and discussing charitable causes. Jack recognized a few faces from newspaper photos. Business leaders, politicians, old money families. "This way." Grace led them to a table near the front. "You're sitting with me." Lily's eyes were wide, taking in everything. "It's like a fairy tale," she whispered to her father. Dinner was served on fine china, dishes with French names Jack couldn't pronounce, but tasted amazing. He watched Grace work the room, moving from table to table with practiced ease. Yet whenever she returned to their table, she seemed to relax, as if she could finally be herself. After dessert, the hotel staff cleared space for speeches. Grace's cousin Edward spoke first about the foundation's achievements. Then Grace stood and made her way to the podium, her silver dress shimmering under the spotlights. "Good evening, everyone," she began, her voice clear and confident. "This year has been one of transformation for the Whitmore Foundation. We've expanded our education initiatives, launched new community programs, and—" she paused, her eyes finding Jack's. "And I've learned valuable lessons about true courage and kindness." The room grew quiet as Grace continued. "A few months ago, I was attacked in City Park. A man I'd never met came to my rescue, without hesitation, without thought of reward. He showed me that real heroes don't wear expensive suits or make grand donations, though we appreciate those too," she added with a smile, earning light laughter from the crowd. Jack's face warmed as he felt curious eyes turn toward him. Lily squeezed his hand under the table. "Jack Turner," Grace said his name with such warmth it made his chest tighten, "taught me that wealth isn't measured in bank accounts. It's measured in the courage to help strangers, in the strength to raise a remarkable daughter alone, and in the humility to be exactly who you are, regardless of circumstance." Murmurs rippled through the crowd. Some guests looked shocked at such a personal revelation at a formal event. Others seemed touched by Grace's sincerity. "So while we celebrate our foundation's work tonight, I want to thank my hero, not just for saving me from those attackers, but for showing me what real value looks like." Grace raised her champagne glass. "To Jack Turner, and to all the everyday heroes who make our world better through simple acts of kindness." The audience applauded, following Grace's lead in raising their glasses. Jack sat straight-backed, military training helping him maintain composure despite the emotion welling in his chest. Lily beamed beside him, proud tears in her eyes. After the speeches, couples filled the dance floor. Grace made her way back to their table, her cheeks flushed from speaking. "I hope that wasn't too much," she said softly to Jack. He stood, finding strength in her courage to be vulnerable. That was. He struggled to find words that wouldn't sound awkward or insufficient. "Thank you. Dance with me?" Grace held out her hand. Jack hesitated only a moment before taking it. As they moved to the dance floor, he noticed some people still watching them, but for the first time that evening, he didn't care. Grace fit perfectly in his arms, her head resting lightly against his shoulder as they swayed to the music. Something shifted in Jack's heart as they danced. The weight of loneliness he'd carried since losing his wife felt lighter. Grace's words at the podium echoed in his mind. About value. About being exactly who you are. Here was this remarkable woman who could have anyone, choosing to dance with him, to praise him publicly, to see him for exactly who he was. As the music played softly, and Grace's hand remained warm in his, Jack allowed himself to feel something he hadn't felt in years. Hope. Hope that love might be possible again. Hope that his heart, scarred but healing, could make room for someone new. In Grace's eyes, he saw not just gratitude or friendship, but possibility. And for the first time in a very long time, that didn't frighten him. The grand ballroom of the Whitmore estate sparkled with crystal chandeliers and polished marble floors. Jack stood near a Roman-style pillar, tugging at his rented tuxedo's collar. He felt like a fish out of water among the sea of designer gowns and custom suits. Still, seeing Lily's eyes light up at the splendor made it worthwhile. Grace had just finished her speech, and the applause still echoed in his ears. Her words about him being her hero had brought warmth to his chest, though he wasn't used to such public attention. Now, scattered groups chatted over champagne and fancy appetizers with names he couldn't pronounce. Well, the man of the hour. A smooth voice cut through Jack's thoughts. Edmund Whitmore approached, swirling amber liquid in a crystal glass. His silver-streaked hair was perfectly styled, and his tuxedo probably cost more than Jack's yearly salary. A practiced smile played on his lips, but his eyes remained cold. "Mr. Turner, isn't it?" Edmund extended his hand. "Grace's rescuer." Jack shook it firmly, noting the slight pause before the word rescuer. "Just Jack is fine." "Just Jack." Edmund's smile widened. "How quaint. You must find all this rather overwhelming. Quite different from your usual circles, I imagine." "I manage," Jack replied evenly, though his jaw tightened. Edmund stepped closer, lowering his voice. "You know, it's really quite remarkable, the timing of it all. A security guard just happening to be in the right place, at the right time, to save one of the city's wealthiest women. Are you suggesting something?" Jack's military training kept his voice steady, but anger simmered beneath. "Oh, not at all." Edmund raised his hands in mock surrender. "I'm merely observing how fortunate the circumstances were, for everyone involved." His eyes flicked to Lily, who was admiring an art piece across the room, especially considering the educational opportunities that have opened up since then. Jack's fists clenched at his sides. "I didn't ask Grace for anything." No, of course not." Edmund's tone dripped with false sympathy. "You didn't have to, did you? Grace has always had a soft spot for strays." Before Jack could respond, Edmund turned to a passing group of socialites. "Margaret, Charles, have you heard the fascinating story of how our dear Grace met her new friend here?" The couple paused, their jewelry glinting under the chandeliers. Edmund launched into the tale, his voice carrying just enough to draw others near. With each word, he painted Jack's actions with subtle shades of suspicion. "Quite the fairy tale, isn't it?" Edmund concluded. "The everyday hero who just happened to save the damsel in distress, though one does wonder about coincidences." Jack watched as knowing looks passed between the listeners. Whispers began immediately as they dispersed, spreading through the crowd like ripples in a pond. He heard fragments. "Planned it all along, taking advantage. After her money." Across the room, Grace was speaking with a group of donors. Jack saw the exact moment the whispers reached her. Her smile faltered slightly, and she glanced his way with a flash of uncertainty in her eyes. Though she quickly recovered, continuing her conversation, the damage was done. Jack's chest felt tight. The room that had seemed merely uncomfortable before now felt suffocating. The crystal glasses and fancy artwork mocked him, reminding him how far he was from his own world. He'd been a fool to think he could belong here, even for one night. A waiter passed with champagne, and Jack caught snippets of conversation. Security guard? Of all things. Letting his daughter get art lessons. Probably planned the whole thing. His face burned. Every military medal he'd earned, every honest day's work he'd done, every sacrifice he'd made as a single father, none of it mattered here. To them, he would always be an opportunist, a gold digger who staged a rescue for personal gain. Jack watched as Edmund moved smoothly through the crowd, spreading his poison with practiced ease. The cousin's words found fertile ground among these people who had never known what it meant to work hard for everything they had. Pride, his constant companion since his wife's death, rose like bile in his throat. He'd survived war, raised a daughter alone, worked nights to make ends meet. And now he stood here, being judged by people who'd never known a day of real struggle. The worst part was seeing Grace's reaction. Though she tried to hide it, he could tell Edmund's words had planted a seed of doubt. The trust they'd built over these past weeks suddenly seemed fragile, tainted by whispers and suspicious glances. Lily approached him, her borrowed dress swishing against the marble floor. "Dad? Are you okay? You look upset." Jack forced a smile for his daughter's sake, but inside, his humiliation hardened into something bitter and sharp. He'd been right all along. Some worlds weren't meant to mix. He didn't belong here, and no amount of fancy speeches or charity galas could change that fact. The morning sun cast long shadows across Grace's garden as Jack stood rigidly by the ornate fountain, his hands clasped behind his back in military fashion. His face was drawn, the previous night's joy replaced by a deep hurt that etched lines around his eyes. Grace hurried down the stone path toward him, her heels clicking against the pavement, her elegant blue dress catching the breeze. "Jack, I'm so glad you came," she said, reaching for his hand. But he stepped back, maintaining a careful distance. "I heard what they were saying last night," Jack said, his voice low and controlled. "About my intentions." Grace's face fell. "Edmund has always been jealous. Please don't listen to—" "It's not just Edmund," Jack cut in, running a hand through his graying hair. "I saw the way everyone looked at us. The whispers, the smirks." His shoulders tensed as he recalled the cutting remarks and sideways glances from the previous evening. "Those people don't matter," Grace insisted, taking a step closer. "I know who you are, Jack. You're the most honest man I've ever met." Jack let out a bitter laugh. "Do you? Or do you just see what you want to see?" He gestured at the sprawling estate around them. "Look at this place, Grace. Look at your world. I was fooling myself thinking I could belong here." Grace's eyes welled with tears. "You do belong. You've shown me what real kindness looks like, what it means to live with purpose instead of pretense." "And what about Lily?" Jack's voice cracked slightly. "She's already dealing with so much. I can't let her become the subject of gossip, the poor girl whose father tried to marry into money." "Nobody who matters believes that," Grace pleaded, reaching for him again. This time, her fingers brushed his arm before he pulled away. "Lily loves coming here. She's flourishing with her art mentor. Please don't take that away from her." Jack's jaw tightened. "She'll understand. She always has." He squared his shoulders, falling back on his military bearing like armor. "I appreciate everything you've done for us, Grace. But this, whatever this is between us, it needs to end." Grace felt her chest constrict. "Jack, please, don't let other people's spite destroy something real." Her voice trembled. "I care about you. And Lily, more than I've cared about anyone in years." "That's exactly the problem," Jack said quietly. "You care too much. You try to fix everything with your resources, your connections. But some things can't be fixed that way." He took a deep breath. "I need to protect my daughter. And my pride. It's all I have left." Grace stood there, tears now flowing freely down her cheeks. "Your pride?" she whispered. "Is that worth more than what we could have together?" Jack's expression softened for just a moment. revealing the pain beneath his stern exterior. Sometimes, protecting the people we love means walking away. He straightened his jacket, a simple garment that suddenly seemed to highlight the gulf between their worlds. "Goodbye, Grace." "Jack, wait!" Grace called after him. But he was already striding down the path toward the gate, his steps quick and purposeful. She watched him go, her heart shattering with each step he took. The garden that had been filled with possibility now felt empty and cold. The fountain's gentle splash seemed to mock the tears running down her face. Jack didn't look back as he passed through the wrought iron gates. His military training helped him maintain his composure until he reached his truck, parked discreetly around the corner. Once inside, he gripped the steering wheel until his knuckles turned white, fighting the urge to turn around. The drive home passed in a blur. Jack barely registered the familiar streets of his neighborhood, so different from Grace's manicured estate. He pulled into his modest driveway and sat there for a long moment, letting the engine idle before finally turning it off. Inside his small house, the silence was deafening. Family photos on the walls seemed to watch him. His late wife's smile, Lily's childhood grins, moments of simple happiness that had nothing to do with wealth or status. Jack sank into his worn armchair, the one he'd refused to let Grace replace with something newer. His phone buzzed with a message from Grace, but he couldn't bring himself to read it. Instead, he stared out the window at the gathering clouds, retreating into the familiar comfort of silence. It was better this way, he told himself. Better to end it now before they all got hurt even more. But the emptiness in his chest argued otherwise, and the memory of Grace's tears threatened to break through his carefully constructed walls. Jack closed his eyes, trying to convince himself he'd made the right choice. The silence of the house wrapped around him like a heavy blanket, offering no answers, only the cold comfort of solitude. 3 days crawled by like molasses in winter. Jack Turner threw himself into his work with desperate intensity, taking extra security shifts that left him bone-tired but not tired enough to forget. Each time his phone buzzed with Grace's name, he let it ring until silence filled his small apartment again. The familiar routine of uniform, thermos of coffee, and quiet walks to work became his shield against the ache in his chest. In his security booth at night, Jack found himself staring at his reflection in the dark window, seeing not just himself, but the ghost of hope that had briefly flickered in his life. His weathered hands gripped his coffee cup too tightly, and memories of Grace's warm smile at the gala haunted him. The whispers of the wealthy guests echoed in his mind. "Gold digger," they'd said, "taking advantage." Each word had been a paper cut to his pride. At home, he moved through the motions of daily life, like a man underwater. The small kitchen where he and Lily usually shared cheerful breakfasts now felt hollow. Even their morning conversations had dwindled to quiet "good mornings" and "see you laters." The walls of their modest apartment, once comfortable in their simplicity, now seemed to close in around him, reminding him of everything he couldn't provide. Meanwhile, across town in her sprawling estate, Grace Whitmore spent her evenings in her father's art gallery. She walked slowly past each painting, her fingers trailing along the gilt frames, but her eyes were distant. The collection that had once brought her comfort now felt like a museum of loneliness. Each evening she found herself pausing before the same landscape painting, a simple scene of a park at sunset, so similar to where she'd first met Jack. Her phone sat heavy in her hand, Jack's number unanswered on the screen. 20 calls, 20 moments of hope, 20 disappointments. The echoes of her heels on the marble floors seemed louder now, emphasizing the emptiness of her grand home. Even her garden, usually her sanctuary, offered no peace. The bench where she and Jack had shared conversations now stood as a monument to what she'd lost. "Morris," she called to her butler one evening, her voice tight with unshed tears, "would you mind bringing me some tea?" But when he delivered the steaming cup, she couldn't bring herself to drink it. Instead, she stared at her father's portrait, wondering if his legacy would forever poison her chances at happiness. On the third day, as afternoon sun streamed through the gallery windows, Grace heard unexpected footsteps. She turned to find Lily Turner standing in the doorway, looking small but determined in her school uniform, her art portfolio clutched to her chest like armor. "Lily?" Grace's voice cracked with surprise. "Sweetheart, what are you doing here?" Lily stepped forward, her young face serious beyond her years. "I had to come. Dad's not himself anymore. He just works and sleeps, and when he thinks I'm not looking, He gets this look on his face like something's broken inside. Grace sank onto a nearby velvet bench, patting the space beside her. Lily sat down, her portfolio sliding to the floor, forgotten. "I've tried calling him," Grace said softly. "He won't answer. It's not because he doesn't care," Lily burst out, turning to face Grace with fierce conviction. "It's because he cares too much. I hear him at night sometimes, pacing in the living room. He looks at your number on his phone when he thinks I'm not watching." Grace's hands trembled slightly in her lap. "The things people said at the gala." "Dad's proud," Lily interrupted, her voice thick with emotion. "Maybe too proud sometimes. But Miss Whitmore, I've never seen him look at anyone the way he looks at you." "Not since Mom died." She paused, blinking back tears. "He's scared, though. Scared he'll never be enough in your world." Grace reached out and took Lily's hand, feeling its slight tremor. The girl's words struck deep in her heart, cutting through the fog of her own pain. "Your father is more than enough," she whispered. "He made me feel safe and seen in a way no one in my world ever has." Lily squeezed her hand back. "Then don't give up on him, please." Her young face was earnest, hope shining in her eyes. "He taught me that anything worth having is worth fighting for. Maybe you could show him the same thing?" Grace looked down at their clasped hands, her manicured fingers intertwined with Lily's paint-stained ones. In that moment, she felt something settle in her heart, a determination taking root. This wasn't just about her and Jack anymore. It was about this remarkable young woman who believed in love enough to bridge their worlds. It was about the family they could be, if only pride and fear could be overcome. "You're right," Grace said, pulling Lily into a gentle hug. She breathed in the faint scent of acrylic paint and teenage shampoo, feeling the girl's shoulders relax against her. "I won't give up on him, on any of this." When they pulled apart, Lily's smile was watery but real. Outside, the afternoon light had softened to gold, painting the gallery in warm hues that seemed to promise hope. Grace held on to Lily's hand, drawing strength from its simple warmth, knowing that sometimes love required not just an open heart, but the courage to fight for what mattered most. The moon cast long shadows across Grace Whitmore's estate as she sat in her study, staring at the family portrait above the fireplace. Her father's stern face looked down at her, a reminder of all the secrets and pain his legacy had brought. The house felt especially empty tonight, with only the tick-tock of the grandfather clock keeping her company. A sharp crack echoed through the halls. Grace's head snapped up, her heart suddenly pounding. That sound, it came from the back door. Her hands trembled as she reached for her phone, but she forced herself to stay quiet, to listen. Another crack, louder this time. Then the unmistakable sound of splintering wood. They were breaking in. Grace slipped off her heels, moving as silently as possible toward the study door. Her bare feet made no sound on the polished hardwood floors. Through the crack in the doorway, she caught a glimpse of shadows moving in the hallway, 2 men, their faces hidden behind dark masks. The same masks from the park. "Check upstairs," one of them growled. The old man said she'd be home. Grace's breath caught in her throat. She backed away from the door, her mind racing. The study had no other exits except a large window overlooking the garden, 2 stories up. Her phone felt heavy in her trembling hands as she crouched behind her father's massive oak desk. The thug's footsteps echoed through the house, growing louder, then softer as they moved from room to room. Grace's fingers shook as she pulled up her contacts. Jack's name sat there, untouched, for 3 days. 3 days of silence that felt like an eternity. "Where are you, rich girl?" The voice was closer now, just down the hall. Grace pressed the call button, holding her breath. 1 ring. 2 rings. Her heart thundered so loud she was sure they would hear it. "Jack," she whispered when the line clicked. "Please, they're here. The men from the park." They broke in. Her voice cracked. "I'm scared." There was a moment of silence on the other end. Grace could almost see Jack's face, torn between his hurt pride and his protective instincts. "Where are you?" His voice was tight, controlled. "My study. 2nd floor." She swallowed hard. "Jack, they're armed. I saw." "Stay hidden. I'm coming." The soldier in his voice took over. 10 minutes. "Can you stay quiet that long?" "Yes," she breathed. "Keep the line open. Don't speak unless you have to." Grace nodded, though he couldn't see her. She could hear Jack moving, car keys jingling, a door slamming. Then the sound of his truck engine roaring to life. Heavy footsteps approached the study. Grace pressed herself deeper into the shadows behind the desk, making herself as small as possible. The phone stayed clutched to her ear, Jack's steady breathing her only comfort. The study door creaked open. Well. The voice was cruel, amused. Daddy's little office. Bet she spends lots of time in here trying to play businesswoman. Grace held her breath. From her hiding spot, she could see their boots moving across the floor. One of them kicked over a chair, making her jump. "Come on out, princess," the other man called. "We just want to have a little chat about your father's old friends." The desk was her only protection now. Grace could hear Jack's truck engine through the phone, his breath coming faster. 5 minutes, he whispered. One of the men started pulling books off the shelves, letting them crash to the floor. Your daddy owed some people. Those debts didn't die with him. Grace's hands were shaking so badly she had to press the phone against her chest to keep it steady. The men moved closer to the desk. A drawer crashed open above her head. "Check behind the desk," one of them ordered. Grace's heart nearly stopped. She looked desperately toward the window, but there was no time to run. The heavy footsteps circled the desk slowly, like a predator stalking its prey. 3 minutes, Jack's voice came through, tight with tension. She could hear his truck accelerating. A flashlight beam swept the floor, inching closer to her hiding spot. Grace pressed herself against the wood paneling, willing herself to become invisible. The beam of light was inches from her feet. Then the study door slammed shut. Both men spun around. "What was that?" Grace heard Jack's truck engine cut off through the phone. Her heart leaped he was here. The thugs heard it too. "Someone's outside," one of them hissed. "Check it out." "I'll find her." Grace heard one set of footsteps leave the room. The remaining man started methodically opening cabinets, getting closer to her hiding spot with each search. Through the phone, she heard Jack's voice, barely a whisper. "Coming up the back stairs now. When you hear me call out, run for the door." The man was at the last cabinet before the desk. Grace's muscles tensed, ready to move. "Hey!" Jack's voice boomed through the hallway, making both Grace and the thug jump. "Looking for someone?" Grace exploded from behind the desk, catching her attacker by surprise. She darted for the door as the man lunged for her, his fingers grazing her arm but finding no purchase. She burst into the hallway to find Jack there, solid as a mountain, his military training evident in every line of his body. His eyes met hers for a split second, full of determination and something deeper she didn't have time to name. "Get behind me," he ordered, and Grace didn't hesitate to comply. The thug from the study charged out after her, stopping short when he saw Jack. Through the window at the end of the hall, Grace could see flashing lights approaching Jack. Must have called the police on his way. Jack stood there, feet planted firmly, his presence filling the hallway. He looked different than he had at the gala, no tailored suit, just worn jeans and a t-shirt he must have thrown on before racing over. But he'd never looked stronger to Grace, never more like the hero she knew him to be. "You picked the wrong house," Jack said, his voice deadly calm. "And the wrong woman to threaten." The second thug appeared at the top of the stairs, brandishing what looked like a crowbar. Jack didn't flinch. He kept himself between Grace and danger, ready to fight for her despite everything that had happened between them. A sharp crack echoed through the halls. Grace's heart pounded as heavy footsteps thudded across her marble floors. Through the study's door, she glimpsed 2 masked figures, the same build and movement as her attackers from the park. This time, they carried something that glinted in the dim light. Grace's trembling fingers found her phone. She ducked behind her father's massive oak desk, punching in Jack's number from memory. Each ring felt like an eternity. "Grace?" Jack's voice was rough with concern. "They're here," she whispered, her voice barely audible. "The men from the park. They have weapons." There was only a heartbeat of silence before Jack responded, "Hide somewhere safe. I'm coming. Call the police." Grace crawled to her father's old storage room, a small space hidden behind a bookshelf. Her fingers shook as she dialed 911, reporting the break-in in hushed tones. The operator's calm voice did little to steady her racing heart. Minutes felt like hours as she listened to the intruders ransacking her home. They were getting closer to the study, their boots scuffing against the hardwood floors. Grace held her breath. Suddenly, there was a new sound. the quiet but deliberate movement of someone else entering. Grace recognized Jack's measured footsteps, his military training evident in his silent approach. The storage room door creaked open, and Grace nearly screamed until she saw Jack's familiar face. He pressed a finger to his lips, then offered his hand. Instead of telling her to stay hidden, he helped her up. "Stay behind me," he whispered. "But we face this together." Grace nodded, surprising herself with a surge of courage. Jack's presence made her feel stronger, more capable than she'd ever felt in her life. They moved into the study just as the intruders entered. Jack's reaction was immediate and precise. He launched himself at the larger man, using the element of surprise to knock the weapon from his hand. The gun skittered across the floor, far from reach. Grace found herself facing the second intruder. Without thinking, she grabbed a heavy crystal paperweight from her desk and hurled it at him. The man stumbled, giving Jack the opening he needed. Years of military training took over as Jack efficiently subdued both men. His movements were controlled and purposeful, never using more force than necessary. He quickly had one man pinned, while the other lay groaning on the floor. Grace stood tall, her phone still in hand. "The police are on their way," she announced, her voice steady and clear. "And this time you're going to tell them exactly who sent you." Flashing lights and sirens filled the driveway minutes later. As officers swarmed the house, Jack and Grace stood side by side, watching their attackers being led away in handcuffs. Neither had moved from the other side since the fight ended. When the last police car pulled away, Grace turned to Jack. Her elegant composure cracked, and she began trembling. Without hesitation, Jack pulled her close, his strong arms wrapping around her. "I've never felt safer than when you're with me," Grace whispered against his chest. "Not behind all these walls, not with all the security systems money can buy. Just you, Jack." Jack's arms tightened around her. The simple truth of her words cut through all his doubts and fears. He'd been so worried about their different worlds, about what people might think or say. But holding her now, knowing he'd nearly lost her, none of that mattered anymore. "I tried to stay away," he said softly, his voice rough with emotion. "I thought I was protecting both of us, you from scandal, me from heartbreak. But tonight," he pulled back just enough to look into her eyes. "Tonight made me realize something." Grace looked up at him, her eyes bright with unshed tears. "What?" "That I can't keep denying how I feel about you. These past few days without you have been empty. When you called tonight, nothing else mattered except getting to you. Not my pride, not what anyone might say." Grace's hands tightened on his shirt, and fresh tears spilled down her cheeks. But for the first time in days, they were tears of relief, of joy. They stood there in her ransacked study, holding each other, neither willing to let go. The grandfather clock chimed midnight, its familiar sound somehow making the moment more real. They had faced danger together and come out stronger. Jack's military training had protected them, but it was Grace's courage that had truly impressed him. She hadn't hidden or cowered. She had stood beside him, faced their attackers together. He touched her cheek gently, wiping away a tear with his thumb. The simple gesture held more tenderness than any words could express. In that moment, all his carefully constructed walls crumbled. He couldn't fight his feelings anymore. Didn't want to. Whatever challenges lay ahead, they would face them together. Red and blue lights flashed across Grace's manicured lawn as the last police car pulled away from the estate. The night air held a lingering chill, and the grand foyer felt emptier than ever as Grace sank into her father's old leather armchair. Jack stood by the window, his military training still evident in his alert posture, watching until the patrol car's taillights disappeared around the corner. The silence between them felt heavy with unspoken words. Grace pulled her cardigan tighter around her shoulders, more for comfort than warmth. The marble floors still bore scuff marks from the struggle, a reminder of how differently this night could have ended. "Thank you," Grace said softly, breaking the quiet. "For coming when I called?" Jack turned from the window, his features softening as he looked at her. "I'll always come when you need me, Grace." She noticed he'd gotten a small cut above his eyebrow during the fight. Without thinking, she rose and stepped closer, reaching up to touch the wound. Jack caught her hand gently, but didn't let go. "I should have been here all along," he said, his voice rough with emotion. "These past few days, staying away. I was wrong." Grace felt tears prick at her corners of her eyes. "Why did you leave, Jack? Really?" He released her hand and moved to sit on the leather sofa across from her chair. Running a hand through his gray-flecked hair, he looked more vulnerable than she'd ever seen him. "Because I was afraid," he admitted, the words seeming to cost him. "Not of those men, or even of your cousin's rumors. I was afraid of not being enough." Grace leaned forward, her heart aching. "Enough for what?" "For this world of yours." He gestured at the grand room around them. "For you. I'm just a security guard, Grace. A widowed veteran raising his daughter on overtime pay and prayers. Your friends at that gala, they looked at me like I was the help." "Jack Turner," Grace said firmly, moving to sit beside him on the sofa. "Do you think any of those people would have rushed here tonight to protect me? Do you think their bank accounts or social connections would have meant anything against those men?" He met her eyes, and she saw the pride warring with his insecurity. "When I first met you in that park," Grace continued, her voice softening, "you didn't see an Heiress or a Whitmore. You saw someone who needed help, and you acted without hesitation. That's who you are, Jack. That's what I—" She paused, gathering courage. "That's what I fell in love with." Jack's breath caught audibly. His hands, calloused from years of work, found hers. "Grace, let me finish," she said gently. "This house, my father's money, the galas and charity events, none of it matters. Do you know when I've been happiest these past few months? At your church picnic, watching you teach the kids how to grill hot dogs? Having coffee with you at that tiny diner where everyone knows your name? Seeing how proud you are of Lily, how you've raised her to be such an amazing young woman." Tears spilled down her cheeks now, but she didn't wipe them away. "I don't want my world, Jack. I want yours. I want simple breakfasts and weekend barbecues and a love that's real. I want you." Jack's eyes glistened as he reached up to brush away her tears with his thumb. His touch was gentle, reverent almost, as if he couldn't quite believe she was real. "I love you, Grace Whitmore," he said, his voice thick with emotion. "I think I have since that first night when you insisted on making sure Lily and I got home safe. You looked at us like we mattered." "You do matter," she whispered, "more than anything." Jack pulled her into his arms then, and Grace melted into his embrace. She felt his strength, his warmth, the steady beat of his heart against her cheek. His hand cradled the back of her head as she clung to him, finally home in a way her mansion had never provided. "I'm not going anywhere," he murmured into her hair. "Not ever again." Grace lifted her face to his, seeing in his eyes all the love she'd been searching for her entire life. When their lips met, it felt like coming home. Like every wrong turn had led them exactly where they were meant to be. The mahogany boardroom doors swung open as Grace strode in, her heels clicking purposefully against the polished floor. The morning sun streamed through tall windows, casting long shadows across the faces of the Whitmore Corporation's board members. Edmund sat at the head of the table, a practiced smile plastered on his face that didn't reach his cold eyes. "Well, if it isn't our dear Grace," Edmund drawled, his voice dripping with fake warmth. "We were just discussing the recent, unfortunate events at your estate." Jack stood quietly in the corner, having insisted on being present after the break-in. His military bearing was evident in his straight posture, but he remained a respectful observer. This was Grace's battle to fight. Grace placed her leather portfolio on the table with deliberate care. "Yes, Edmund, let's talk about unfortunate events." Her voice was steady, carrying none of the tremors that usually plagued her during confrontations. "Like how you've been spreading lies about Jack Turner, the man who saved my life, twice." Edmund's smile faltered slightly. "My dear cousin, I was merely expressing concern about your associations." "No." Grace's palm hit the table, making several board members jump. "You were trying to manipulate me, just like you've done for years, just like you did with Father's business partners." She pulled out several documents from her portfolio, sliding them across the gleaming table surface. "These are records of your private meetings with the same men who attacked me, bank transfers, written correspondence." The color drained from Edmund's face as the board members began picking up the papers, murmuring among themselves. "You orchestrated both attacks," Grace continued, her voice growing stronger. "You wanted to frighten me into selling my shares, thinking I'd run away from my responsibilities." She turned to address the entire board. "My cousin has been embezzling funds for years, hiding it behind charitable donations that never reached their destinations. Edmund shot to his feet, his chair scraping against the floor. "These are absurd accusations! You can't possibly believe." "The police have copies of everything," Grace cut him off. "As does the SEC. Your games are over, Edmund." The boardroom erupted in chaos. Several members started making urgent phone calls, while others demanded immediate explanations from Edmund, who had gone deathly pale. Grace remained standing, her shoulders straight, as she watched her cousin's carefully constructed facade crumble. "I'm not the naive little girl you could bully anymore. I've learned what real strength looks like." Her eyes briefly met Jack's, drawing courage from his steady presence. "This company was built on my father's dream of helping people." Grace addressed the board. "Edmund corrupted that dream with greed and manipulation. As majority shareholder, I'm calling for an immediate vote to remove him from his position." Edmund's face contorted with rage. "You ungrateful little—" He lunged forward, but Jack was there in an instant, his presence alone enough to make Edmund stumble back. "I suggest you sit down," Jack said quietly, his calm voice carrying more authority than any shout. The board secretary cleared his throat. "All in favor of removing Edmund Whitmore from his position, effective immediately?" Hands rose around the table, one after another. Edmund watched in horror as his power crumbled before his eyes. "You can't do this," he sputtered. "This company is my life." "No," Grace corrected him. "It was my father's legacy, and I'm reclaiming it." She turned to the security guards who had entered the room. "Please escort my cousin out. The authorities will want to speak with him." As Edmund was led away, still protesting, the board members surrounded Grace, offering support and congratulations. She handled each interaction with grace and authority, outlining her plans to restore the company's charitable mission. Jack watched from his corner, pride swelling in his chest. This was the woman he'd first glimpsed that night in the park. Not a fragile heiress, but a person of deep conviction and courage. She caught his eye across the room, and a small smile passed between them, full of understanding and admiration. The morning sun had risen higher, washing the boardroom in golden light as Grace took her rightful place at the head of the table. She looked different now, stronger, more assured. The shadows of doubt that had haunted her eyes were gone, replaced by quiet confidence. "Now," she addressed the board, "let's talk about how we can make this company a force for good again." One by one, the board members nodded in agreement. They had witnessed more than just the fall of a corrupt executive. They had seen the rise of a leader who understood that true wealth lay not in money, but in integrity and compassion. Jack remained in his corner, standing tall and proud, watching as Grace commanded the room with gentle but unwavering authority. She had found her voice, and it rang with truth and purpose. This was her moment of triumph, not just over Edmund's schemes, but over the fear and self-doubt that had held her back for so long. The morning stretched on as Grace led her first board meeting, outlining plans for corporate responsibility and community involvement. Her voice never wavered, her vision never faltered. She had transformed from someone who inherited power to someone who had earned it through courage and conviction. When the meeting finally adjourned, board members filed out with renewed purpose and respect for the Whitmore name, not because of its wealth, but because of the integrity Grace had restored to it. She had done more than expose Edmund's lies. She had reclaimed her family's legacy and given it new meaning. The spring afternoon painted their modest living room in warm, golden light. Lily sat cross-legged on their well-worn couch, surrounded by a small pile of college letters she'd been too nervous to open. Jack perched on the edge of his favorite armchair, trying to mask his anxiety with an encouraging smile. Grace stood nearby, her elegant presence somehow fitting perfectly in their humble home now. "Come on, sweetie," Jack urged gently. "Whatever those letters say, we'll figure it out together." Lily's hands trembled as she picked up the thickest envelope, the one from the prestigious art institute she'd dreamed of attending. The paper crinkled under her nervous fingers as she carefully broke the seal. Jack held his breath, watching his daughter's face for any sign of the news within. The room fell silent as Lily's eyes darted across the page. Suddenly, her hand flew to her mouth, and tears welled up in her eyes. Jack's heart clenched, preparing for disappointment. But then Lily's face broke into a radiant smile. "I got in!" she exclaimed, her voice cracking with emotion. And And they're offering me a full scholarship? Jack blinked in surprise. A full scholarship? They hadn't even applied for one. They knew their chances were slim, given the competitive nature of art programs. Lily continued reading, her eyes growing wider. It's the Elizabeth Whitmore Memorial Scholarship for Promising Young Artists. She looked up at Grace, understanding dawning on her face. Grace, did you? Grace stepped forward, her eyes soft with affection. The scholarship was established years ago in my mother's name, but it had been largely forgotten. I simply brought it back to life. She smiled warmly. Your talent did the rest, Lily. The selection committee was amazed by your portfolio. Jack stood up slowly, emotions warring across his face. Gratitude, pride, and a hint of his old uncertainty about accepting help. But before he could speak, Lily launched herself off the couch, wrapping her arms around Grace in a fierce hug. Thank you, Lily whispered, her voice thick with tears. Not just for this, but for believing in me. Grace hugged her back, just as tightly, her own eyes glistening. You made it so easy to believe in you, sweetheart. Lily pulled back, wiping her eyes, and turned to face her father. Jack stood there, still processing the magnitude of the moment. His daughter's dreams he'd feared were out of reach, were suddenly, wonderfully possible. Dad, Lily said softly, moving to stand in front of him. I know you've worried so much about not being able to give me everything, but I need you to understand something. She took his hands in hers, her voice steady despite her tears. You've already given me everything I need. Jack's throat tightened as Lily continued. You gave me love, strength, and the courage to chase my dreams. You showed me what real character looks like. You taught me that wealth isn't about money. It's about having people who believe in you. She squeezed his hands. Everything I am, everything I might become, started with you. Jack tried to speak, but emotion closed his throat. Instead, he pulled Lily into a tight embrace, his tears finally falling freely. He held his daughter close, remembering all the nights he'd stayed awake, worrying about her future. All the extra shifts he'd worked to keep her art supplies stocked. All the times he'd wondered if he was enough. In his arms, Lily whispered, I love you, Dad. You're my hero. You always have been. Jack's shoulders shook slightly as he pressed a kiss to the top of her head, overwhelmed by pride, gratitude, and a love so deep it left him speechless. His daughter, his beautiful, talented, kind-hearted daughter, was going to chase her dreams. And somehow, against all odds, she'd grown up seeing wealth in all the right places. Through his tears, he caught Grace's eye over Lily's shoulder. She stood watching them, her face full of understanding and love, and Jack felt his heart expand even further. Sometimes the greatest gifts came wrapped in unexpected packages, like a chance encounter in a park that had changed everything. The morning sun cast long shadows across the church parking lot as Jack's old pickup truck rumbled to a stop. Grace sat in the passenger seat, smoothing her simple blue dress, chosen specifically to blend in rather than stand out. She traded her usual pearls for a modest silver cross necklace, and her typically perfectly styled hair fell in natural waves around her shoulders. You look beautiful, Jack said softly, reaching over to squeeze her hand. Just be yourself. These are good people. Lily hopped out of the back seat, her floral sundress swishing around her knees. Everyone's going to love you, Grace. They're like one big family here. Grace took a deep breath, fighting the flutter of nerves in her stomach. This wasn't like the grand cathedral she occasionally visited for holidays, where people sat in isolated silence. Already, she could hear warm greetings and laughter floating from the simple white church building. As they walked toward the entrance, an elderly woman with silver hair rushed to meet them, her arms outstretched. Jack Turner! And Lily! Honey! Oh, and you must be Grace. Her kind eyes crinkled at the corners as she pulled Grace into an unexpected hug. I'm Martha. We've heard so much about you. Grace felt her tension begin to melt away as Martha linked their arms together, guiding her toward the church doors. Come on in, dear. We've got coffee and donuts in the fellowship hall before service. Inside, the wooden pews gleamed with decades of loving care. Sunlight streamed through stained glass windows, casting rainbow patterns across the worn carpet. Children darted between the aisles while their parents chatted in small groups. A tall man in coveralls approached them, wiping his hands on a handkerchief.
Jack, good to see you, brother.
He embraced Jack warmly before turning to Grace. I'm Tom, the mechanic down on 5th Street. Welcome to our little church family. One by one, people came to greet them. A young mother with a baby on her hip, an elderly gentleman using a cane, a group of teenagers who clearly adored Lily. Each one welcomed Grace with genuine warmth, asking about her interests, telling funny stories about Jack, making her feel like she'd known them for years. Sarah makes the best apple pie you've ever tasted, Jack explained as a woman pressed a piece into Grace's hands. And Bill here helped me fix my roof last summer. Grace watched in amazement as Jack transformed among his church family. The quiet, reserved man she knew became animated, laughing freely, clapping shoulders, accepting and giving hugs. This was his element, a place where status didn't matter, where authenticity reigned. As they settled into a pew, Lily between them, the pianist began playing familiar hymns. Grace found herself swaying slightly to the music, touched by the sincerity in the congregation's voices. No professional choir could match the heart in these slightly off-key but heartfelt songs. During prayer time, people shared their joys and concerns openly. A teenager's college acceptance, a neighbor's illness, a new baby on the way. Grace listened, moved by how deeply they cared for each other's lives. The pastor, wearing a simple suit and kind smile, delivered a sermon about community and acceptance. His words weren't polished or pretentious, but they reached straight to Grace's heart. She found herself nodding along, understanding in a new way what it meant to belong somewhere. After the service, they gathered in the fellowship hall for lunch, a potluck spread across folding tables. Paper plates and plastic utensils replaced fine china, but the food was made with love. Grace sampled everything from Martha's famous chicken casserole to Tom's wife's chocolate chip cookies. Try the green bean casserole, Jack urged, piling more food on her plate.
Miss Ruby's been making it the same way for 40 years.
Grace watched as Lily joined her friends at a table, their laughter echoing across the room. Children played tag between the tables while their parents talked. An elderly couple held hands as they shared a piece of pie. Jack's arm slipped around her waist, steady and sure. In front of everyone, he held her close, no hiding, no pretense. The gesture said clearly, "This is where we belong, together." Martha stopped by their table, beaming. "Grace, honey, we'd love to have you join the Wednesday night women's group, and the Fall Festival Planning Committee could use your organizational skills." "I'd like that," Grace replied, surprised to find she truly meant it. As the afternoon wore on, Grace found herself deep in conversation with Sarah about her work at the local shelter. Tom's wife Mary showed her photos of her grandchildren. The teenager who played piano asked if Grace would help with the Christmas program. They weren't trying to impress her or gain anything. They simply welcomed her into their circle, offering friendship freely. Jack watched her throughout the day, his eyes soft with understanding. As the crowd began to thin, he pulled her close again. "Thank you for coming today," he murmured. "I should be thanking you," Grace replied, leaning into his strength. "I've never experienced anything quite like this." The late afternoon sun slanted through the windows as they helped clean up, working alongside their new friends. Grace found herself humming one of the hymns as she stacked chairs with Martha. Jack caught her eye across the room, and in that moment, she saw all the love and certainty in his gaze. He made his way to her side, taking her hand in his as naturally as breathing. "This feels like home again," he whispered, his voice thick with emotion. The autumn evening painted the city park in gentle shades of amber and gold. Fallen leaves crunched softly beneath their feet as Jack and Grace walked hand in hand along the winding path. The setting sun cast long shadows through the trees, and a cool breeze carried the sweet scent of late-blooming flowers. Grace squeezed Jack's hand, remembering the night that had changed everything. "It feels like yesterday," she said, glancing at the spot where he had come to her rescue. "Who would have thought a mugging could lead to this?" Jack's thumb traced circles on her palm, his touch warm and reassuring. "I almost walked a different way that night," he admitted. "But something told me to take this path." He smiled, the corners of his eyes crinkling. "Now I know it was God's plan all along." They paused near a wrought iron bench, and Grace noticed Jack's hand trembling slightly. His other hand kept touching the pocket of his worn leather jacket, a nervous gesture she'd never seen before. "You okay?" she asked, concerned. You seem a little distracted tonight. Jack cleared his throat. Just thinking about how much has changed. He guided her to the bench, and they sat together, watching the last rays of sunlight filter through the trees. A year ago, I thought I had it all figured out. Work my security job, raise Lily, keep my head down. I never expected. Grace leaned against his shoulder, breathing in the familiar scent of his aftershave mixed with the crisp evening air. Neither did I. All that wealth, and I was so lonely until you showed me what really matters. A streetlight flickered on above them, casting a warm glow that reminded Grace of that first night. She could still feel the terror of the attack, but more vividly, she remembered the strength and kindness in Jack's eyes when he helped her up. Jack shifted on the bench, turning to face her. His expression was serious, almost solemn, but his eyes sparkled with emotion. Grace, he began, his voice rough with feeling. You know I'm not a man of fancy words or grand gestures. Those aren't the things I love about you, she said softly. He smiled, reaching into his pocket. When Sarah died, I thought that part of my life was over. I focused everything on Lily, on surviving. His hand emerged holding a small velvet box, worn at the edges. But you taught me that love isn't something you find just once. Sometimes it finds you again, when you least expect it. Grace's breath caught in her throat as Jack slid off the bench and knelt before her. Her hands flew to her mouth, tears already welling in her eyes. This isn't a fancy ring, he said, opening the box to reveal a simple silver band with a modest diamond. It was my grandmother's. She was a cleaning lady who worked hard her whole life, but she and my grandfather had the strongest love I've ever known. Grace's vision blurred with tears as she looked at the ring, more beautiful to her than any of the expensive jewelry she owned. You could have anyone, Grace. Someone from your world, someone with wealth and status. Jack's voice wavered slightly. But you chose to love a simple security guard and his daughter. You showed me that true worth isn't in bank accounts or fancy houses. It's in the heart. A tear rolled down Grace's cheek as Jack took her hand in his. His rough, work-worn fingers were gentle against her skin. I can't offer you a mansion or a life of luxury, he continued. But I can promise you this. I'll love you with everything I have, every day of my life. I'll stand beside you through whatever comes our way. He swallowed hard. Grace Whitmore, will you walk life's journey with me? Will you marry me? Grace's heart felt so full it might burst. She looked at this man, this wonderful, honest, loving man, and saw everything she'd ever wanted. Not the polished suitors her family had paraded before her, but a real partner. Someone who loved her for herself, who had taught her the joy of simple pleasures and true connection. Yes, she whispered through her tears. Then louder, yes, Jack Turner. 1,000 times yes. His hands shook slightly as he slipped the ring onto her finger. It fit perfectly, as if it had been waiting all these years for her. Grace stared at it, overwhelmed by its simple beauty and all it represented. Jack rose from his knee, pulling her up with him. The streetlight cast a gentle glow around them, just like that first night. But now, instead of fear and uncertainty, the air was filled with love and promise. They came together beneath the light, and when their lips met, it felt like coming home. Jack's arms wrapped around her waist, and Grace's hands found their way to his shoulders. The kiss was tender and deep, carrying all the words they didn't need to say. When they finally parted, Jack rested his forehead against hers. I love you, Grace, he whispered, his voice thick with emotion. I love you too, she replied, feeling the weight of his grandmother's ring on her finger. A perfect circle of past and present, of simplicity and depth, of a love that had found them both when they least expected it. The streetlight continued to shine down on them as they held each other close, their shadows merging into one on the path where their story had begun. The late summer sun cast a warm glow over Jack's modest backyard, now transformed into a festive gathering space. Paper lanterns swayed gently in the breeze, strung between trees that had witnessed countless Turner family moments. Folding tables draped in white cloths dotted the lawn, laden with potluck dishes brought by neighbors and church friends. Mrs. Rodriguez from next door arranged her famous empanadas on a platter while chatting with Mr. Chen, who owned the corner grocery store. They mingled easily with Grace's reformed business associates, who had chosen loyalty to her over Edmund's corruption. The blend of worlds that had once seemed impossible now felt natural, like pieces of a puzzle finally falling into place. Jack stood at the grill, spatula in hand, wearing the world's best dad apron Lily had given him years ago. His face glowed with contentment as he flipped burgers, occasionally stealing glances at Grace, who moved through the crowd with effortless grace. She wore a simple sundress, her elegance showing in her warm smile rather than designer labels. "Need any help there, soldier?" Grace teased, sliding next to him and bumping his hip playfully with hers. "Ma'am, I believe I have this situation under control," he replied with a wink, wrapping his free arm around her waist. Pastor Mike from their church raised his glass of lemonade. "To think I almost missed officiating the wedding of the year because I thought Jack would never ask anyone out again." Laughter rippled through the gathering. Even Jack chuckled, remembering his stubborn resistance to love. How different things looked now, surrounded by this unlikely family they'd built together. Children from the neighborhood played tag around the yard, their shrieks of delight mixing with the gentle hum of conversation. Some of Grace's most trusted employees, now partners in her reformed company, discussed plans for new charitable initiatives with members of their church outreach committee. "Everyone," Lily called out, her voice carrying across the yard. "Could I have your attention, please?" The crowd quieted, turning toward the makeshift display area where a large easel stood covered in a white sheet. Lily's hands fidgeted with the edge of her artist's smock, but her eyes shone with confidence. "As most of you know, I've been working on something special for my first real gallery showing next month," she began. "But I wanted you all to see it first, especially Dad and Grace." Jack moved closer, placing the spatula down and wiping his hands on his apron. Grace slipped her hand into his, and they stood together, hearts swelling with pride. Lily took a deep breath and pulled away the sheet. Gasps of appreciation filled the air. The painting was a masterpiece of light and shadow, showing two figures in a park at night. A man stood protectively near a woman, their forms illuminated by a single streetlight. But it was more than just a scene. It captured a moment of destiny. The brushstrokes swirled with energy and hope, suggesting the beginning of something profound. "I call it the night love found its way," Lily announced, her voice thick with emotion. "Because that's what happened when Dad saved Grace. Love found its way to all of us." Grace pressed her hand to her mouth, tears welling in her eyes. Jack stood straighter, his chest tight with emotion as he looked at his daughter's talent made manifest. "The technique is something my mentor helped me develop," Lily continued, gesturing to the art professor Grace had introduced her to. "But the inspiration," she looked at her father and Grace, "that came from watching two people brave enough to let love in, even when it seemed impossible." Applause erupted from the gathering. Mrs. Rodriguez wiped her eyes with her apron, and even some of Grace's business associates seemed moved by the raw emotion captured in the painting. Jack stepped forward, pulling Lily into a tight hug. "Baby girl, this is incredible," he whispered, his voice rough with pride. Grace joined them, completing their family circle. "You've captured something so beautiful," she said, touching Lily's cheek gently. "Not just the moment, but the feeling." The celebration continued as the sun began its descent, casting long shadows across the yard. Neighbors shared stories, children played with sparklers, and the barriers between different worlds dissolved in the warmth of friendship and community. As twilight settled in, Grace found Jack sitting on the back porch steps, watching their guests with contentment. She settled beside him, leaning her head on his shoulder. "Penny for your thoughts, soldier?" she asked softly. "Just thinking about how life surprises you," he replied, wrapping an arm around her. "One minute you're walking home from a night shift, the next, you're hosting backyard parties with society folks, eating hot dogs alongside church ladies," Grace finished with a laugh. They sat in comfortable silence for a moment, watching Lily show her painting to a small group of admirers. The young artist's face glowed with joy as she explained her techniques, her dreams now within reach. Grace turned to Jack, her eyes reflecting the soft light of the lanterns. "You know," she said, her voice gentle but filled with meaning, "you didn't just save me that night. You saved me from a life without love." Jack pulled her closer, pressing a kiss to her temple as they watched their gathered loved ones. A beautiful tapestry of lives woven together by chance, choice, and courage. The evening breeze carried the scent of grilled food and summer flowers, while overhead, the first stars began to appear. They held each other, surrounded by the life they'd built together. A life rich not in money, but in love, family, and second chances. What would you do if you were in their place? Comment your answer below, and let's see how you'd rewrite the ending. If you enjoyed the story of Jack Turner, I handpicked the next story that you will enjoy. Please don't miss this one. Click here to watch it.